Of a couple of people who know their way around the different parties' headquarters. Joe Tanner, who used to work for Boris Johnson, thanks for joining us, and Sean Kemp, who was one of the Liberal Democrats' political advisors during that coalition period. I mean, Sean, from what you've seen so far, do you think that this is some kind of concrete return for the Lib Dems?
Yes, definitely looking that way. I think the Lib Dems came into this thinking the 2019 set of results in these same wards was a really great result for them that sort of showed the first steps of making a comeback from sort of the coalition darkest days of what happened after that. I think if they make gains again from that set of results and keep showing momentum, it's going to be great for them, because what they're really looking at here is how are they set up for the next election? Are they set to challenge the Conservatives, particularly in those seats around London and in the South East? And nights like this are one of the few nights when the Liberal Democrats, frankly, can get noticed when there are a relatively small number of MPs and so on. I mean, that's the reason why Ed, jumps on a massively slow-moving tractor, is because, then you guys will show it on the screen and the rest of it. So to get the chance to actually say, look, we're here and we're winning and we're a threat to the Tories, they would be delighted with, I think.
And Joe, how miserable do you think the Tories will be on what they're watching right now in Tory HQ?
Well, it's that classic thing, isn't it? If it's a bit too early to say, but it certainly doesn't look very good. But this thing with the Lib Dems is always that the Lib Dems are often they're sort of underestimated and often underestimated between elections, and you kind of forget what they're busy doing on the ground in terms of making inroads, in terms of their general campaigning. And I think there is that sense of this has been a sort of two-party talk consistently on a national level for what feels like many months. It's all about what Keir's going to do. It's all about what Rishi's going to do. Is Keir going to overtake, etc. And quietly, I think the Lib Dems are plugging away. So there probably is a sense of how much really can the Tories predict right now. They've been sitting, I think, munching on their pizzas at Tory HQ that Rishi Sunak apparently bought them all out of his own pocket, they were keen to stress. But I'm not sure it's going to give them great comfort at the moment.
Joe, the briefing from Conservative sources about the pizza said there were only 10 pizzas, which I did wonder if that was really going to keep them going throughout the whole evening. But Sean,
there's not a lot of people left at Tory HQ, which is a worry. So.
Maybe they've all gone. Maybe they took a look at the pizzas and then headed off. Anyway, Joe and Sean, thank you very much for joining us. Sean there with some more important commentary on the tractor. We're about to go to the news, but before we do that, let's take a look at our tower tally of what we're seeing so far tonight on this local election evening. At around about 2 o'clock in the morning, you can see Labour gaining 30 seats there at 188, the Tories losing 49, the Liberal Democrats gaining 15 with 78 seats, and another 5 for the Greens. We've been talking to all of those political parties, and we've been out around the country hearing from people on the ground. Plenty more of that to come. But now, the news with Luxby Gopal.
Hello, here's your summary of the BBC News. Counting is underway in the local elections in England in one of the last major tests of public opinion before next year's general election. Voters have been deciding who will run services at 230 local councils, with around 8,000 seats up for grabs. Mayoral elections have also been taking place in Bedford, Leicester, Mansfield and Middlesbrough. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake has more.
Celebration in Stoke-on-Trent. Just one councillor of thousands finding out their fate. Counting has begun in more than 200 towns, cities and rural areas across England where voters have had their say on who should run local services. The Tories are braced for a tough night, hoping only to limit their losses. And among a handful of very early results, they lost control of Brentwood in Essex, with the Liberal Democrats picking up seats, hoping to make gains elsewhere too, at the Conservatives' expense.
Fantastic result for the Liberal Democrats in one of the safest Tory seats in the country. We've gained 3 seats, we're now up to 17 seats, and the council moves into an overall control. And it's a time of change in Brentwood, and we're really delighted. It's fantastic news.
Labour have so far made modest progress, but the party needs a strong showing to prove its lead in opinion polls can bring winning results. In a first for elections in England, photo ID was required at polling stations, which left some unable to vote, but it's too soon to say what impact the change has had. Only around a quarter of the councils holding elections are counting votes overnight, so early results won't give anything like the full picture. But in the hours ahead, these local elections will be closely watched as a crucial test of the national political picture. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
And all the local results will be available for you online. To see who won in your local area, you can use our postcode checker, which is available on the BBC News website and on our app. In other news, Ukraine's Air Force has shot down one of its own drones, which it says had lost control above central Kyiv. There were explosions for around 15 to 20 minutes yesterday evening as air defence tried to shoot it down in an area near the president's office. The Air Force later admitted it was Ukrainian and had been destroyed to avoid undesirable circumstances. Members of the biggest rail workers' union, the RMT, have voted to renew its mandate for taking strike action. It's the third such vote in a dispute over pay and conditions, which began last year. It raises the prospect of strikes continuing until nearly the end of the year. A US court has ruled that the singer Ed Sheeran didn't copy Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On when composing Thinking Out Loud. The British musician had denied stealing elements of the song for his 2014 worldwide hit. Heirs of Marvin Gaye's co-writer argued that Sheeran, Warner Music Group and Sony Music Publishing owed them money for copyright infringement. Sheeran's legal team had argued that the melodies are different and the elements used in both songs are common in pop music. With the King's coronation fast approaching, people hoping to get the best in-person view on the day are camping in central London this evening as rehearsals and final preparations take place in and around Westminster Abbey. It's expected hundreds of thousands of people will line the route of the procession to and from the Abbey. It's only a short journey down the Mall and along Whitehall, and people are already positioning to get the best view. And we will be back in an hour with the latest news updates, but for now it's back to our special election night coverage with Laura. And just a reminder though, before then, to see who won in your local area, you can use our postcode checker, which is available on the BBC News website and on our app.
A very warm welcome back to election 2023. It is 7 minutes past 2, if my eyesight serves me correctly, and we are starting to see some results coming in from around the country, giving us an early taste of what these results are going to mean for the political parties. Votes are still being counted. There we can see people hard at work in Ipswich, in Suffolk, and some interesting races there we might talk about a bit later. Bolton, an area that's been very, very closely fought over. We've been hearing from our reporter on the ground. And let's show you the scene also in Leicestershire. Looks like you could hardly hear a pin drop. People standing, watching, wondering and waiting. And let's have a look also at Hull, where we've been talking about in the last few minutes. The Lib Dems have retained control, taking seats, where Labour was hoping to take that council and shove them out of office. But the Liberal Democrats, very happy indeed, we were hearing from our reporter there, to have done well and held on to the council. We can show you what's happening in Stoke. Look, applause there. Happy Labour faces. That looks like that's the announcement of one particular ward, because these are local elections, not general elections, so you don't get the big dramatic declarations. But that looks like a councillor to me who's just won his ward again, getting hugs from his friends and family, pats on the back. And we'll go back to Stoke a bit later in the night and see what's going on, because that is one of those parts of the country, Staffordshire, high Brexit vote, very closely fought, where Labour really want to be showing evidence of progress. I want you to remind you of a couple of important things as we're watching together, things coming through the night. These seats, the last time they came up, were fought in 2019, in May 2019. So Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, Vince Cable were in charge. Completely different political world. That's our baseline for these seats. The other thing to say is there aren't elections happening in every part of the UK. No elections in Scotland, no local elections in some parts of England, none in London, for example, none in Wales. There's some elections in Northern Ireland, but not for a couple of weeks' time. public service announcements out of the way, so we all know what we're dealing with. Chris, really interesting. Just before 2 o'clock, we heard from Sir John. We sort of can say at about 2 a.m. so far, it's looking like grim night for the Tories. Bit of progress for Labour, but a step forward, not a giant stride. But the Lib Dems making a decisive step. Maybe not a huge stride, but that's kind of where we're looking at.
Yes, and so something of a pincer movement as far as the Conservatives are concerned in terms of Labour gains at their expense in some places and Lib Dem gains elsewhere. Just to pick on your reflections there and those pictures from Stoke, I hear from a Labour MP that they think that they could flip Stoke. That is looking probable. They say such a key battleground, Stoke, isn't it, as we've been reflecting over the last couple of hours. A couple of other things that have popped onto my phone in the last few minutes, Laura. The Conservative leader of Thurrock, this is in Essex, has lost their seat to Labour. Big Lib Dem gains in Windsor and Maidenhead in Berkshire, as we've been reflecting. Control there looks like it might be on a knife edge. And we were talking, 10-15 minutes ago about Tamworth in the Midlands. 7 gains for the Labour Party there, pushing it from Conservative control to no overall control. Labour pointing out it has been run by the Conservatives since 2004. So they point there to something that they suggest amounts to being significant, even though it's not somewhere where they have taken control. It's flipping into
significant
no overall
signs. And I think we've heard already, I think in the studio tonight, haven't we, that Labour will be very careful to be pointing out that geographical progress, not just the overall tallies of where they take control. We might actually see tonight, in the way these elections are happening, not that many councils change hands. Yes. Maybe more tomorrow when there's lots more results. But if Labour was to take Stoke, and I think they'd need 8 new seats to do that, that would be quite a symbol, wouldn't it? It
would, and symbols matter. So we should reflect, shouldn't we? And particularly in this overnight section of the results coming in so many of the councils, it's only a third of council seats that were up for election. So mathematically, the likelihood of a change in control is much more limited than it is when an entire council is up. As we've been reflecting, though, you can still read a huge amount into a set of results, even in a council where nothing in headline terms has changed. But the party leaders, yes, of course, they're looking at what we get to tomorrow when there's that projected national share of the vote, but they're also looking for symbolic places that point to change, not least places that they can leap on a train to tomorrow or during the day on Friday in order to point to a triumph.
Well, I was going to say, how many times do you think that you've been to a political visit in Stoke? And if you add it to how many times I've been to a political visit to Stoke, we'd probably be in triple figures.
And people in the high street say, oh, not you again.
But why in particular that part of the country? You know, we think of Staffordshire, you've explained that it would be a really important symbol, but that part of the country, why is that the kind of place that Labour is so keen to show progress?
It's so important because places like Stoke, they absolutely have to be Labour securing the support of and being seen to secure the support of if Keir Starmer is going to climb this massive electoral mountain that he faces at the next general election. They were absolutely thumped, weren't they, back in 2019? Biggest general election defeat for Labour since 1935.
And Stoke ended up with 3 Tory MPs.
Well, indeed, exactly, alongside swathes of other seats in the Midlands and the north of England, many of which had never been held by the Conservatives or had not been held by the Conservatives for a very, very long time. So Labour have to be winning back places like that or winning wards back in places like that to give the party a sense that they might be able to climb that mountain at the next general election. Because on the one hand, they've had these massive opinion poll leads recently. On the other, whilst that has given them some optimism, the mountain that they still face is absolutely colossal. The kind of swing that they need to creep back into Westminster with a majority of 1 is massive, let alone enough to be able to comfortably govern with a majority of their own. So that's why places like Stoke and elsewhere will be poured over in the micro detail, ward by ward, almost vote by vote, to see what the parties can deign from them and work out how they calibrate their campaigning and their geographical focus over the next year, 18 months.
Well, we like micro detail.
Absolutely.
You used the word micro detail. I know someone who's got good at providing micro detail. Reeta, tell us.
Let me take you through some micro detail in a couple of the councils where they are still counting. I'm going to take you to Lincoln. There it is flashing over there in the east. As you can see, there are still 5 seats to declare, Labour on 15, Conservatives on 9. Now, this is a Labour council. It's been Labour since 2011, but the Conservatives took the parliamentary seat here at the last general election. So it's one of those areas where Labour really wants to see an advance in its support. But look at this. It's lost 2 seats and the beneficiaries are the Liberal Democrats. They've picked them up. And this is the change in the share of the vote on 4 years ago. As you can see, Labour up a little bit, but the Lib Dems, again, are the main beneficiaries of the drop in support for the Conservatives and for the Greens. So we'll be watching that council as it tallies up more. I'm going to take you now to Dudley in the West Midlands. You can see it just highlighted there. Still counting here in Dudley as well, still 16 seats to declare. Now, this is a flip-floppy sort of council. It's been Conservative since 2021 and it was hung before then. Conservatives now on 35 and Labour on 20. But as always, it's the change in the share of the vote that's interesting, just a sort of 1 seat swap there. But look at this, Labour up by 15% in Dudley, Conservatives up by 5% as well, and the Independents down by 24%. So it feels like a real collapse in the independent vote here in Dudley. And at the moment, it's Labour who are the main beneficiaries. So we'll watch that too. Much more to come, Laura.
Reeta, thank you very much indeed for taking us under the bonnet in those 2 different races. Let's get out on the ground. Let's talk again to Reeta Chopra in northwest Leicestershire. Now, we were talking a while ago about, Conservative nerves in that part of the country, the controversy around the local MP, Andrew Bridgen, who's not a Conservative MP anymore. But it sounds like it might not just be the Conservative majority at risk. It sounds there is a whisper that Labour might even win overall. What are you hearing?
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary, actually. I mean, there's more counts going on, so I hope you can still hear me. But yeah, I mean, Labour have just won 3 seats now here from the Tories in areas that you wouldn't expect them to actually win seats from the Tories. In Ashby, it's an affluent middle-class area. You would have thought they'd still support the Tories. I mean, and some of the margins are quite good in these wards. In one ward, Labour won with 337 votes compared to the Conservative candidate on 221. And in local elections, that's quite a decent margin. Interestingly, though, when you looked out on the social media, on the leaflets, the Labour parliamentary candidate, Amanda Hagg, was endorsing all the Labour candidates on social media when she was out canvassing, and that seems to have done the trick because those are the people that have gained from the Tories. Whereas that wasn't the case for the Tory candidates. They couldn't be endorsed by Andrew Bridgen because he's been expelled from the party. So perhaps the Andrew Bridgen effect is having an effect, and we may see that potentially Labour, have minority control here.
OK, Nisha, well, keep us posted with what's going on. We can hear applause in the background as another ward is announced. But keep us posted, as that really would be a fascinating result if Labour managed to take it. And also there are in the background all those really interesting issues around the local MP having been booted out of the Conservative Party, and Nisha explaining why that had an impact in terms of the local conversation. Let's go a bit south and a bit east to Andrew Sinclair. I hope I got that geography right. Andrew's in Ipswich in Suffolk for us. Now, there's lots of interesting things happening in Suffolk, all kinds of different races. But can we start first of all on what could be a moment of history, that mid-Suffolk race where the Green wants to be the first majority council for them? What does that race look like, do you reckon?
Yeah, this is the result we'll get tomorrow afternoon when they count the result in mid-Suffolk. But yes, it's next door to us here in Ipswich. And it is a seat which the Greens have been taking incredibly seriously. They were already the main opposition on the local council. At the moment, when the Liberal Democrats vote with them as well, the Conservatives have to rely on the chairman's casting vote to get their business done on Mid-Suffolk Council. So the Greens believe they can take that council tomorrow, and they believe they might be able to take it and to become the first fully run Green council with a full overall majority in the country. So that's one we'll be watching very closely tomorrow afternoon.
And in terms, Andrew, of the other races in your area, I mean, we can see we've got very few numbers so far from the councils, but the Tories are down 12, Labour up 3, the Lib Dems up 5. What will you be particularly keeping a weather eye on in the next couple of hours there?
Well, here in Ipswich, this is the one little bit of red in what is otherwise a very blue county of Suffolk. The news from Ipswich is that once again Labour are going to hold on to this council. They seem to have been holding on to all their seats tonight, and they've just made another gain. So they will be very pleased with what's happening here, not least because this is a marginal Conservative seat currently held by 2 Conservative MPs, and Labour will say that the fact that they've picked up another seat here tonight shows that they're moving in the right direction. What's interesting, though, is it's a very mixed picture in other parts of East Anglia at the moment. That Labour lost a seat in Harlow, and the Conservatives have held on to Harlow Council tonight. Labour also lost a seat in Basildon, which has in the past been a Labour-run council. As Chris was saying a short while ago, we believe the Conservative leader of Thurrock Council could be in trouble. We're also hearing that the Conservatives could be in big trouble in Braintree Council tonight. Now, Braintree is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because it is the seat of James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, and Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary. Also, very interestingly, it's the place where the Wethersfield Military Air Base is, the place which is about to take a lot of asylum seekers. And I'm told that Wethersfield has been playing very big on the doorsteps in Braintree.
Andrew, thanks so much. Keep us posted with what's going on at that count, because a lot of different and really fascinating sort of patchwork of races in that part of the country. I just want to show you what's happened in Ipswich, where Labour has held the council. That's where we were speaking to Andrew from. And actually, they've gained 1 seat, Tories down 1. Let's have a look at the vote share. 45% for the Labour Party, 35% for the Conservatives. But here's an interesting thing. Let's look at the change in the vote since 2019. Increase of 2% for the Labour Party, increase of 4% for the Conservative Party, but independents and smaller parties falling away. So that suggests something slightly different going on there in Ipswich. But people will, as Andrew was saying, be watching it closely, because it's one of those places where you have a split city in terms of the MPs that they choose to send to Westminster. Another place like that is Plymouth, where there is a prominent Conservative MP, the Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, and then also Labour representation at Westminster. Luke Pollard, I believe, if I'm getting my facts right. Martin Oates is there for us tonight. Now, when we talked to you about an hour ago, Martin, you said the Tories were worried about wipeout. Is that what it looks like?
Yes, it seems that the predictions made by figures in both parties are being realised. So we are seeing Labour gains here. I did mention, I think, that there's been a lot of local disagreement within the Conservative group. Some councillors leaving the group. Interestingly enough, a couple of the former Conservatives, now independents, have held their seats, but we are seeing those Labour advances. I also mentioned looking towards a general election, as inevitably we will do. We are seeing Labour gains in the seat of Johnny Mercer, the Plymouth Moorview MP, and Veterans Minister. So Plymouth already has 1 Labour MP, Luke Pollard, the Shadow Defence Minister. The other city MP, Johnny Mercer, he is probably watching these results tick in with some degree of anxiety.
Well, and you'd see why if you could see the share that we're showing our viewers at the moment. So the change in share in Plymouth so far, the Conservatives down 16%, a very significant drop in their support there. But Martin, in your assessment, you know, we've talked already, there was a really vigorously discussed local issue about cutting down trees, the kind of thing, we saw the same thing happen in Sheffield, that drive people around the twist and make them really, really angry with their local council. Has it been possible there to assess tonight, talking to your contacts on the ground, the blend between those local controversies and the national picture?
It's very difficult to say. I mean, I have to say, I haven't really heard anybody talking about the trees here in this hall, but you know, the trees really were just the end of a long saga. It's been a very, very difficult period for the Conservative group here in the city. There have been disagreements over all kinds of things. They lost their group leader over the issue of the trees. He resigned after making that executive order which led to the trees being removed just before the election campaign. But if we wind back a year, they went into the election campaign last year, because Plymouth elects in Thurs, having just lost a leader then. In that case, he was toppled in a vote of no confidence. So it's been an extremely fraught time for the Conservative group, which must have had a role, I think, in tonight's events. OK, Martin, thanks very much indeed. Well, if those Labour gains all come through, they would be very pleased to be able to take Plymouth, because it's very definitively on their target list. Now, Bridget and Munira, you're going to leave us before too long, but Richard, you are staying with us, I'm afraid. I'm not going to let you leave. So we're going to talk to these two for the next 5 minutes. Bridget, Plymouth looks like a great picture for you. Are you expecting to take it?
It's looking good, and we've made significant gains and are making significant gains there. And I think why that matters is, of course, we want to secure control locally, but actually it's what that takes us to where it comes to the general election. And as you heard, we've got a really key target parliamentary constituency there for the general election. That's the kind of place that I was really hoping we'd make progress this evening. And judging by Plymouth, that's exactly what's happening.
But what we were hearing earlier, though, from John Curtice was actually suggesting that the overall picture for Labour is, you know, decent, but not where it would need to be if you are to climb that Himalayan mountain to have a bigger swing than Tony Blair got into number 10 in 1997.
We know we've still got a big challenge ahead of us, and we're not complacent about that for 1 second. I think obviously we're going to see a lot of results running into tomorrow as well. There's a lot to come, particularly again in those areas, those parts of the country where we need to make progress for the general election. So we've still got to keep an eye out for those. But I think if you look at the progress we're making right across the country, whether that's in Plymouth or whether it's in Hartlepool, we came very, very close in Hartlepool to take control there, which I don't think any of us really expected. And to be 2 votes short of taking control because of one ward, a very safe Conservative ward, I think does show the progress that we've been making since 2019. There's a long way to go, but I think we're seeing some really strong and encouraging signs this evening that Keir Starmer has turned around the Labour Party. We're looking outwards to the country. We're focusing on the issues that do really matter to voters, particularly on the cost of living, on the NHS and on crime. And I think we're starting to see that come through in the results, that people recognise we understand the challenges they face, and in contrast with the Conservatives, we recognise that we've got a plan to tackle it.
Some people did feel that you ran quite a nasty campaign in some ways, though.
I think it's perfectly legitimate that we should point out exactly what this government is responsible for after 13 years. And the reality after 13 years is that people right across the country are worse off. They feel less safe than they did. We've got fewer police on our streets, and we face record waits where it comes to the NHS. I think it's right and proper that we make that clear, and we make clear exactly who is responsible for that. That's 13 years now of Conservative failure.
Munira, you're going to leave us in a few minutes. What's your parting shot?
Well, it's looking like a fantastic night for the Lib Dems. As Chris was saying, it looks like Windsor and Maidenhead, Theresa May's backyard, is on a knife edge because we've made big gains there. We've made gains against Labour in the north east of England, in Hull, in Sunderland, in Newcastle. I believe so. We've become the I believe the official opposition in Sunderland now.
That's correct. So you didn't have any gains from us,
but the point is, we're making gains across the country, north and south, and this is really key for us going forward towards the general election in some of our target seats, whether that's places like Stockport, Surrey, Hertfordshire, and some of those places will be counting tomorrow. But we're feeling very upbeat and positive.
One of the things I wanted to ask both of you about, though, before you leave, is that we know this time there has been some evidence in different parts of the country of one of your parties or the other, you know, just sort of holding back a bit. Now, when that happens, we've heard about it sort of happening in Bracknell. We know that some of your MPs would like you to do it on a more formal basis. If your parties are informally sort of cooperating, sometimes letting people go forward, I mean, has that been a strategy this time?
Absolutely not. I mean, certainly not at a national level. There's no arrangement like that. We are a party that we target our resources in the areas where we know we can win. We've got a record number of candidates standing in these local elections, so there is no pact there.
There's no formal pact, but do you acknowledge it has in some parts of the country been happening on the ground a little bit in this campaign?
Local parties make their own decisions about where they target their resources, but I'm delighted that as I say, we've put up a record number of candidates this time.
Bridget, some of your colleagues would like to see actually something formal.
No, what you tend to see happening is where Labour is doing better nationally, that does actually tend to benefit the Liberal Democrats in constituencies where Labour isn't competitive. So I think in seats where, where it spills over into the general election, where you've got Lib Dem Conservative marginals, a more competitive, a stronger Labour Party does tend to aid the Liberal Democrats in their fights against the Conservatives. And we're in a much stronger position than we were in 2019, that's for sure.
Oh, they're doing you a favour, according to Bridget.
I think what Bridget's alluding to is the fact that we have a savvy electorate that understands tactical voting in a terrible voting system where often people are also voting against a party that they don't want to come in as much as they are voting for the party that wants to come in. And that's and key to, if we want to see the Tories out of government next year, then frankly the Liberal Democrats will need to be picking up seats right across the country, as well as the Labour Party.
OK, Munira Wilson and Bridget Phillipson for the Lib Dems and Labour, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Richard, as I said, you are kindly staying with us. I'm not holding you against your will, but the two of you, thank you very much indeed for being with us. As Munira was saying, we have a savvy electorate. We know we have a savvy electorate, certainly savvy electorate watching us at this time of the morning. And for you savvy people watching out there, Reeta can give us some more delving into the detail. Reeta.
Yes, Laura, thank you. Let's start with a look at where we are now. And these numbers are changing all the time. And as you can see, the Conservatives have lost 64 councillors. Labour has gained 40 councillors and the Liberal Democrats have gained 17. Now, I want to show you a graph which is the projected national share. Now, remember, this is where we extrapolate how the whole country would have voted if everyone were voting in these elections. Remember, London isn't voting, Birmingham isn't voting, but if the whole country were voting, how would it look based on the results that we have so far? And we've got those results from the key wards, which is where we measure how the support for each of the main parties changes over time. And we've got over a third of those in. So this is what the results are suggesting at the moment. This could change, but at the moment, this is suggesting that the Labour Party has actually not put on any support from 2022, from last year. It is actually just flatlining. The Conservatives have lost 5 percentage points on where they were 12 months ago. The Lib Dems have picked up 1% and others, which will include the Greens, are up by 4%. Now, that's an interesting graph, isn't it? Because Labour is clearly doing rather better than it was doing in 2019, which is the last time that these seats were fought. The Conservatives are not on this projection. And Labour will be heartened by the fact that there is that 5% gap between it and the Conservatives. At the same time, they would also like to see more of a surge in their own support and not simply have to rely on that gap. Now, as I say, this is how it looks at the moment. It will change. It can change as more results come in. But as an early indicator, that is where we are. Laura.
Reeta, thank you very much indeed. Well, very interesting projections at this stage, as they are at this stage at about 2:30 in the morning. And we are joined by a couple of new guests joining our panel. Baroness Kramer, Susan Kramer for the Liberal Democrats has joined us. Seamless switchover. And Bridget Phillipson has become Jonathan Ashworth, the Labour Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary. Welcome to you both. And we'll get stuck into a bit of conversation with you in a few minutes' time. Remember, there's a conversation going on online as well as there is here in the studio. If you are the kind of person who likes to do things on your phone while you're watching the telly, this is where you can do it. The BBC's live page, where all the information from the council's counting tonight in England is streaming in. Lots of tips and intelligence from our teams on the ground there. You can find it there on the BBC News app or bbc.co.uk/news. Now, as we were just hearing from Reeta, if things carry on this current trend, then the Conservatives might end up with a share from John Curtice's giant calculator of about 25%. And Chris, that would be worse than when Boris Johnson was in office this time last year, already in a lot of trouble, already with a very unhappy party. and 25% as a projected national share, that figure if the whole country had been voting. That would be one of the worst local election results for a Conservative Party ever, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would, and it would cause real jitters for exactly that reason. Now, there's always examples you can use as a counter, aren't there? And of course. You know, if we go back 4 years, the Conservatives had a pretty rough night, and in the very set of seats, pretty much that we're seeing fought again today. And there's 2 points worth making on that. One is that falls tonight are falls further from big falls that the Conservatives were subjected to last time round. It's also worth pointing out in 2019, after that rough night at the local elections, an even more desperate night for the Conservatives at the European elections that followed, they then, of course, won a general election 6 months later. So when we do these various bits of extrapolation, there are always different lines down which you can point in terms of how things look. But, as you say, that number would really be quite something, and would prompt real nerves and jitters, I think, after a period where they've managed to, at Westminster, settle things down internally after all of the fireworks and turbulence that we all witnessed last year.
But do you think it was actually sort of knock Rishi Sunak off course? I mean, it's been interesting in the last couple of weeks. You've sort of wondered if he's been trying to pretend that these elections weren't even happening. You know, there was the odd picture of him looking at a pothole, but today, and I'm sure we'll see this weekend through the coronation, he'll be very eager to be seen with world leaders and doing all sorts of official things. And we didn't see any pictures of him on the campaign trail today. He was busy instead of Downing Street. So do you think they'll just be sort of blinkers, or will it change something?
So it has been striking how little we've seen of Rishi Sunak out on the campaign. He has been out and about, but not that often. Quite striking on that last day of campaigning on Wednesday, as we saw various political leaders out and about. From memory, Keir Starmer was in Medway in Kent. Rishi Sunak was in Amersham in Buckinghamshire, where there aren't any elections.
And then here he is today,
and then he's been doing
to have the cameras, you know,
the grip and grins and all the rest of it. Now,
with
we should say,
Rwanda,
that any Prime Minister at a point like this weekend would make the most of the diplomatic opportunity to see leaders coming and going and do that sort of world stage thing that only a Prime Minister can do. But yeah, it has been striking that he hasn't been particularly visible. It's kind of been driven by party HQs, been getting on with the sort of business of being Prime Minister. I think what's interesting psychologically, though, Laura, within the Conservative Party, is such was the turbulence of last year, so volcanic were the rows, the party conference in particular, this sort of public civil war playing out to the country, that when I speak to Conservative MPs from the most senior to more junior, they've worn themselves out with internal conflict. And I think there's a sense, really, that however bad things turn out to be, they have hitched their wagon to Rishi Sunak between here and the general election. But when MPs return to Westminster next week, particularly in those areas where, in local authority terms, their party has done poorly, of course they're going to be thinking, my goodness, this isn't just opinion polls, this is key votes in key areas, and will that mean come the general election I'll be done for? And that shifts their mentality, their outlook, and how that then manifests itself it will then be fascinating.
You surely would never suggest that an MP might think about their own welfare when they look at how results stack up across the country.
To do, isn't it?
Well, let's talk to one of those Conservative politicians around the country who has lost his seat, and there are big consequences for them too in Worcester. Let's just take a look at the numbers first before we talk to the former leader there. Now, Worcester Council was already not being controlled by anybody, but let's look at the numbers. Labour now has 13 seats. The Greens have 10 seats. The Conservatives in third place with 8. What's the change? Look at this. Greens take 4. Labour only take 1, even though they were hoping to look competitive there. The Conservatives have lost 7 seats. The vote share, fascinating, not much in it. Labour on 28, the Greens with the highest vote share, 29, and the Tories in third place with 26, the Liberal Democrats in fourth place. But the all-important change of the share, look, the Greens up 10% and the Conservatives down 11%. Now, let's speak then to Chris Mitchell, who was the leader of Worcester Council there. Mr Mitchell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, the Tories didn't win a single seat. You've lost your seat to the Greens. What do you think led to that result?
A number of reasons, I guess. The political backdrop of Westminster undoubtedly is a key factor, which is we heard on the doorstep. But also, I think it goes down to the way that the opposition ganged up is the wrong word. There was a clear strategy of if you want the Tories out, then you need to vote for, in my ward it was the Greens, because the Labour and Liberal Democrats literally didn't campaign, and it was similar in other wards. So yeah, a key factor though was I think some residents showed unhappiness with recent performance in Westminster.
And which particular aspects of that? You know, is it frustration at all the turmoil, all the Conservative drama, or were you picking up a sense of anger about the fact that things are hard for a lot of people right now? You know, was it the political soap opera or the practicalities of life right now?
In truth, residents aren't normally that specific on the doorstep, or rarely anyway. The general angst was that they don't think things have been going well in the last 12 months, and they haven't seen a significant improvement in the last 4 or 5 months, and therefore they, in many ways, just simply said to us, this is a protest vote.
But Rishi Sunak then has not been able to make a difference with that. They're not impressed with him.
No, I didn't say that. I said that some residents had said that they weren't impressed with the performance of late. I think, personally, the Prime Minister has steadied the ship, but he's only had a few months to really make an impact or a difference, and the turmoil we're in takes more. It's a big tanker to turn round, and you can't do it that quickly. But I think there are seeds of growth that we're going in the right direction. Unfortunately, the residents didn't see those seeds.
Why didn't they see that?
We tried to speak to them on the doorstep. In truth, we tried to keep the discussions about local politics, because that's what we are, local politicians, and you know, we don't influence what goes on in the National Health Service or well, Foreign Office or anything like that. But residents just kept going back to national issues. And what do you think it could mean then for the important Westminster seat there in that part of the country? And there's a local curiosity that Robin Walker, who's been the MP there, is standing down. With what you've picked up from people in the town in this election, do you think there will be consequences for the Conservatives in the general election there? Do you think you risk losing that seat? The Worcester City seat has never been a safe seat. It's always been relatively marginal anyway, so it's always at risk. Whoever the next candidate will be knows they've got a really tough job on their hands. Thank you very much indeed, Chris Mitchell, the former Conservative leader of Worcester Council, and thank you for giving us your thoughts there. Now, Richard, as you were listening to Chris, you didn't quite have your head in your hands, but you were looking pretty glum. He said there was general angst, and crucially, he said residents he spoke to have not seen any improvement since Rishi Sunak's been in charge.
I think he was, I think when he went into that in a little bit more depth, I think he was reflecting on the fact that what we've seen is a turbulent 12 months, and that we've only seen a few months of things being starting to be turned around, and I think I generally agree with him on that point, and I can understand where some of his residents come from.
Hang on, he said they haven't seen any improvement. That's what he said. He said there was general angst, but they haven't seen any improvement.
I think you could tell from exactly what he was saying, that what he was saying is over the last year or so it's been tough times in Westminster, and that's basically reflected on the local level. And while things started to stabilise, it's not seeing the improvement that they'd like to have seen so far, and to the extent that they would like to.
But if we look at if we look at the projection of what tonight's results, if they carry on current trend, would mean it would put the Conservatives on 25%. Now that's 5% worse than last year when Boris Johnson was still in charge. Things were already turbulent then, and he was had a very turbulent time for all sorts of different reasons. But if after 7 months of Rishi Sunak in charge, you end up with what's probably or could be on course to be the worst local election performance for the Tories in recent memory, how will people like Mr Mitchell have any confidence that you'll be able to turn it round before a general election?
Well, let's have a look at some of the results that have come through, actually. You know, you look over into Essex, which has been quite a mixed picture, and we've seen a lot of results there, so you can actually look at some compare and contrast now. Basildon, Tories gaining, whereas in 2019, gaining seats against Labour, whereas in 2019 there was no overall control with Labour running the council. Harlow, another absolutely crucial seat if Labour were to form a government. Tories gaining seats.
But
there.
I'm asking you about the overall picture
well,
that our viewers can see
yeah,
and that John Curtice has identified as developing. So the question is, if you end up with 25% of the share of the vote, if the whole country were voting, that would be one of the worst local election performances for the Conservatives in recent memory, 7 months after Rishi Sunak came in as the person to turn it round. And if you're on 25%, how can you look people in the eye and say, yeah, I know it's been tough, but we are turning it round, when you're on 25%?
Well, you need to look at the areas, and you know, this is what Bridget was saying just before, when she was on the panel with me, saying look to the areas and look to the areas where Labour are targeting and need to gain. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do now, and point to some of those councils I've just been
Well,
speaking.
you're trying to avoid my question about what 25% would mean if that was your share of the vote.
But if you don't, look at the individual areas, then it's sort of meaningless, isn't it? You know, if you don't look at, you know, Basildon, if you don't look at what's happening in Peterborough as well, where I've just seen that one of my Conservatives have gained a council seat there off Labour. You know, those are marginal seats which need to be won by Labour in a general election scenario. Mm. I mean, you know,
but they need to be held by your party.
And well, indeed, and that's exactly what's happened in Harlow and in Basildon. You know, if the Greens' vote share notionally goes up several percent, then you know, what impact does that have on a general election? Well, it's we shall have to see. But I don't think we're going to see the sort of national vote share or swings like we've just seen in Worcester in the general election scenario.
But Minister, if you end up with 25% as a share of the vote, if you have lost 1,000 councillors, which you are on course to lose, how can you look Chris Mitchell, who's just lost his seat in Worcester, how can you look him in the eye and say, oh, you know what, we got this, Rishi Sunak really is the man to turn it round, when the performance is worse than it was under Boris Johnson?
Well, this is going to be council by council, right? Some areas are doing better than others.
But this
some
is
areas
the overall picture.
As well.
But you're cherry picking.
Well, I'm trying to look at the seats which you need to win a general election. You know, the fact that in Worcester, you know, the numbers aren't as good as in other areas, you're absolutely right. That would be cherry picking. But the truth is that the seats that we need to win in a general election right across the country, you're just not seeing those Labour gains that they would need to do in order to form a government at the next general election at this stage.
Just picking up on that, Richard, just Labour sources claiming on the basis of the results that they've seen so far that they reckon they could have won the constituencies of Hartlepool, Stevenage, Dudley South, Ipswich, West Bromwich East, Great Grimsby and Aldershot. Aldershot's been held by the Conservatives for years and years. Obviously, we await, you know, results properly trickling through. What could this mean if we see these results continuing in the way that they appear to be at the moment? What would this mean for the government's direction, for the Conservatives' direction? Do you change tack at all, or do you just carry on regardless?
I think you're seeing different results in different parts of the country. I think that obviously people have had a tough time with, and you know, I've said that at the start of the programme, with living costs, energy bills. The government's had to put a huge package in there, but people are still feeling it. You know, I feel it when I do my weekly shop as much as you know, and other people will feel it even more actually. You know, particularly if they're on tight budgets. So that, you know, people are feeling it right across the country. But what I would say is that you're going to have to look in different areas, and if Labour are going to win the next election, they're going to have to take some of those towns in Essex. They're going to have to take seats like Peterborough as well. And you know, if you look at North East Lincolnshire, Conservatives held that council. You know, vital for us to hold Great Grimsby in a general election scenario as well. So there's, you know, it's very different.
Sure, I just wondered, does anything change though? Because if voters have sent a message to the Conservatives tonight, it appears that they have. Let's see the results at the end of Friday. How does the government at Westminster respond to that? Does it change tack, or does it just carry on regardless?
No, I think you make an important point there, Chris. I think what we've seen as Prime Minister a couple of months ago set out his 5 key priorities. I think what people want to see is them delivering on them. That's getting inflation halved by the end of the year. It started to move in the right direction, but it's a long way to go. Get growth going. It's not the recession that people predicted, but it's not where we want to be. Getting hospital waiting lists down. We saw that huge rise during the pandemic. There's a lot of work to do there, and we've started to make some progress with helping with doctors' pensions and things like that, and stopping the boats. Again, that legislation is going through Parliament at the moment. We're going to have to deliver on those things for people to trust the Conservatives for the next general election and to start believing us. Rishi's set out those priorities. I think we're moving in the right direction on that. And that's when he'll get a say. And between him, and people will also start to look at the difference between him and Keir in a general election, rather than on some of those more local factors that you'll get in local elections too.
Richard Holden, thank you so much for being with us. You know, it's a busy night. We have to now let you go. You've put in a long shift. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Jonathan and Baroness Kramer, we will talk to you very shortly. Now, as Richard was saying there, and his defending Rishi Sunak's record and ambition, but underlining there are lots of local factors here. Of course there are. It should also be remembered it is still quite early in the night. Well, not early in the night actually, but it is early in the overall stream of results, because there's plenty of results that will be coming through tomorrow as well. So a lot could change. That projected national share at this point is very much a projected national share. What John Curtice's numbers are suggesting at the moment is roughly 25%. That would be one of the worst Conservative local election performances. But the numbers are still being sketched out. They are not firmly in black and white. So just a reminder for everybody there. Another reminder that these elections are not happening everywhere. They're not happening in Scotland. They're not happening in Northern Ireland for another couple of weeks. They're not happening in Wales. And there are no elections in London, for example. So a couple of the very important caveats we have to bear in mind, while still delving under the bonnet to try to work out what these numbers can tell us, because they can give us and politicians and you, most importantly, the members of the public, a good flavour of where politics is right now, a year or maybe a little more than a year away from the next general election. Rita, give us some of that, delving into the detail.
I feel like a car mechanic here, Laura. You were talking to the Minister about Worcester a little bit earlier. We have the result. It was hung before and it remains hung, but a lot has changed behind the scenes because the Greens are now in second place. Labour is the largest party, but the Greens have overtaken the Conservatives in second place. And if we have a look at what's happened to the seats, the Conservatives lost every single seat that they had up for election this evening. And Labour gained 1, Greens gained 4, and the Lib Dems gained 2. And we can see the change in the share of the vote, always so fascinating. Conservatives plummeting, losing 11%. Greens, the main beneficiaries, but so are the Lib Dems and Labour. So that's the situation in Worcester. I also want to show you Plymouth, where they are still counting. We don't yet have an overall result, but still really interesting to see. Plymouth down there in Devon, of course. So this is a council that has been hung since 2021. It was Labour before that. And with 9 seats still to declare, Labour's on 24, the Conservatives on 17, and the winning post is 29 seats. Let's have a look and see, because this is a top target for Labour. They were taking an aggressive fight to the Conservatives. And look here, they've picked up 3 seats. The Conservatives have lost 5 and independents have gained 2. Let's see if we can look at the change in the share. Conservatives again down 12 percentage points, and it's Labour and the Greens who have benefited. So although we don't yet know the result here, it is looking bright for Labour. We will, of course, bring it to you as soon as we have it. Laura.
Rita, thank you very much indeed. And it's just a reminder there that it's those changes that don't necessarily result in a change of council, but those changes still tell us a lot. All these individual jigsaw pieces emerging to build the picture. Let's look at the pieces totted up so far. Look at our big tally of the results so far. We have Labour there gaining 44 seats at 289. The Conservatives losing 67. The Liberal Democrats gaining 18. Oh, and they've just hit the century. There we are. The Lib Dems have got 100 seats so far tonight. Interestingly, underneath, the Greens gaining 10 And the Residents' Association, a wonderful factor in local elections. Resident associations around the country stand in elections, and in some parts of the country they do rather well, but gaining 1 seat so far tonight. Right, let's go to one of the really exciting races we've been talking about already in Staffordshire, Stoke-on-Trent. Let's go back to Lizzie Glinker. Now, we were talking, Lizzie, Chris had some intelligence suggesting Labour feeling really chipper about what might happen there. What's your latest?
Well, I would say that the Labour supporters in the room have definitely got a spring in their step now. 6 gains for Labour so far, and interestingly 4 of those have come from the Conservatives, but 2 of them have come from the Independents, and I think that is significant because we were saying that actually it might be difficult for Labour to take this council, to actually get control of the council because of the success of the Independents, but they have taken 2 seats from the Independents as well, which the Labour people here think is a really good sign, and they are certainly much more confident. If we had nervous faces at the beginning of the evening, we now are definitely seeing confidence amongst the Labour supporters, and I mean increasing numbers of Conservatives actually leaving the hall. The leader of the the leader of the Conservative group, formerly the leader of the council, we think has actually already left the camp. So that perhaps gives you a bit of a sense about how the Conservatives are feeling this evening. I think we're just about to have another declaration behind me. You can see, so I'll keep going, but you can kind of keep an eye on that behind me. So right now, looking good for the Labour Party here, and actually in other parts of the Midlands, other parts of Staffordshire, it's also looking good.
Lizzie, just while that declaration happens, because we can't really hear you, let's just have a look at the councils around that region in the West Midlands, so we can see some pictures maybe of that declaration. It's not a traditional general election declaration with cheers and Count Binface and all the Screaming Lord such characters. It's a bit drier than that on a council elections, but while that's taking place, with very good signs for Labour from Stoke, just around the West Midlands, Labour have gained 16 councillors. The Tories have lost 17, so that's interesting. Almost a straight swap so far in the numbers. Of course, the more individual races are more complicated than that. But look there, another ward taken for the Labour Party there in Stoke. I think I can see Ruth Smith and Gareth Snell, the 2 former Labour MPs, in my eyesight says, yes, it is. Yes, Ruth Smith there giving the victorious new councillor there a hug, and Gareth Snell. They were 2 Labour MPs in Stoke, both of whom lost their seats last time round. All these individual stories that make up our politics, and you see these faces years later. Lizzie should be able to hear us now again, and Lizzie, more importantly, we can hear you. So Labour look really happy. We saw big smiles on their faces, but happy that they might actually take the council, because if the local Tory leader's gone, he wouldn't have done that unless he thought he'd lost. Or would
yeah, I mean, it is still early days, but that is definitely the mood music on the ground. And you mentioned Ruth Smith, the former Labour MP for North Stoke-on-Trent North. She lost her seat, of course, in 2019. Ruth has been bouncing around this sports hall this evening. She's absolutely thrilled to bits. And I don't know if you remember those pictures of Ruth back in 2019, but I think this might be a slightly cathartic moment for her and many Labour members here in Stoke-on-Trent. We started to mention some of the other parts of this region, other parts of Staffordshire. Tamworth, really interesting. That's gone from Conservative control, held by the Conservatives since 2004. That's gone to no overall control. And that's an interesting one because, you know, of course, that is the parliamentary seat of Chris Pincher, another former Conservative MP. He lost the party, he lost the whip, lost his job as Deputy Chief Whip last year following a scandal at a London members club. And of course that precipitated the fall of the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. So that potentially a bit has had an impact in Tamworth because that actually caused a split within the local Conservative Party in Tamworth. About 6 local Conservative councillors split away from the party. So interesting seeing that having an impact. And again, in Worcester and other parts of the region, we are seeing Labour making gains, if not taking councils, then making gains. And that's something that certainly the people here are feeling is very positive.
OK, Lizzie, thank you so much. Do keep us posted, because that's a really, really interesting and exciting race happening there in Stoke. And we've been hearing from Chris about why that kind of part of the country matters so much, not just, of course, importantly, to the people who live in that part of the world. But let's just, for a quick moment, ponder what we've seen so far might mean for the way that politics sort of evolves. We can talk to Seb Payne, very well connected in Conservative circles, now the director of Onward, a centre-right think tank, who I think had Rishi Sunak at their bash last night in Westminster, and Chris Lloyd, who's the chief feature writer for the Northern Echo. And the Northern Echo is these days a paper that the Conservative Party cares about a lot, because they really see parts of the north of England as territory they want to keep hold of, much of which they took control of for the first time in 2019. I suppose question to both of you really is, are you surprised by what you're seeing so far, and what might it change? Chris?
I am not surprised what I am seeing so far. Up in the northeast, we seem to have various things going through the electoral digestive tract at the moment. We've got Brexit coming through. Brexit. So in 2019, in my neck of the woods in the Tees Valley, Labour did catastrophically. It lost control of 4 out of the 5 councils, including Hartlepool that you've been talking about. Brexit was a big part of that. Jeremy Corbyn was a big part of that. This area seems to have sniffed him out quite early doors, and so now we're seeing that working through the digestive tract. We're also seeing, I think, the kind of allure of Boris Johnson disappearing from our politics up here in the northeast, because after that 2019 council results, he really pushed the seats in the parliamentary term, so that Richard Holden, who you had on, he could win his seat for the first time in 100 years for the Tories. But now that mystical, magical allure of Mr. Johnson has disappeared, and does Rishi cut it in the same way? And now we're also getting a referendum up here, I think, on levelling up as well. And so there are going to be some really interesting results, particularly tomorrow from my area. Darlington is going to be as key as any of the Stoke councils that you're looking at, because that's had a real boost of levelling up money. It's almost the de facto capital of Britain now, with the Treasury up here and Rishi Sunak working from Darlow, but Labour really should be taking that council back, because they lost it in 2019 for the first time in 22 years.
And a fine place Darlow is too, which I think is where Rishi Sunak peered over the edge into that giant pothole, trying very much to look interested in what was happening in the tarmac. But he had the local MP, Peter Gibson, along with him, because it's a very important part of the country for the Tories, not least because he's over in the Richmond constituency, North Yorkshire. Very different demographic, but certainly not a million miles away. But Seb Payne, I think the question will be, will Rishi Sunak shift anything as a result of these outcomes, if indeed the shares are going to be hovering around the 25% stage?
Well, as you've just been hearing, Laura, there's an awful lot of expectations management that have been going on, not just tonight and this morning, but for weeks and months about these elections. And I just think the most interesting thing is how things are being sliced and diced between Labour and the Liberal Democrats here, that at this early stage in the results, it's not clear there's like big momentum, particularly behind Labour at the moment. And that's something that I think many Conservatives will try and seize on. But I think that element we've just heard there about the importance of levelling up, I think one thing that we think at Onward is that levelling up is absolutely key to the next general election, but also key in this kind of post-Brexit realignment we've seen, because after 2016 referendum, you've seen the kind of traditional voting tribes moving different directions in the country. And for example, the Conservatives holding on to Dudley, I think that's an example of this kind of realignment still happening. Now, obviously, you can't get away from the national picture, and that turbulence on the national scene is still going to overwhelm some of those different trends that have been moving around there. But I think so far, it does sort of strike that realignment is still holding. And I think the strategy of just trying to keep on delivering, trying to get things done, but trying to also look for that grander message, that's going to have to be the key focus at the moment. Because as Chris was just saying, the last time you had to look at some of these elections and you were looking where things were with Boris Johnson last year, there was that big optimistic national drive. We're in a different era now. The economy's in a different era. There still needs to be a bit more of that vision behind this to say to people, look, yes, maybe the Sunak government is doing well on trying to fix potholes and trying to get things better on a national stage, but you've still got to give people a nice big jolt of enthusiasm. And I think that's where a lot of the pressure will come after these results.
Thank you very much indeed, Seb and Chris, a Gateshead boy and a Northern Echo writer. Great to hear from you both on the programme. Be interesting to hear in Conservative circles whether that push to give people something more that Seb Payne was suggesting there does become part of the conversation in the coming days. In a couple of minutes, we will hear from Susan Kramer for the Lib Dems and Jonathan Ashworth, both waiting patiently here at the mega desk in the election. Our tally, just before we take you to the news so far, Labour gaining seats there on 45. They've bust the 300 mark now on 314. The Conservatives losing 69. The Liberal Democrats on 100, gaining 18. Lots more to come here on election 2023. But let's take you to check in with the news with Glucksby.
Laura, thank you. Here's your BBC News summary. Counting is underway in the local elections in England in one of the last major tests of public opinion before next year's general election. Voters have been deciding who will run services at 230 local councils, with around 8,000 seats up for grabs. Mayoral elections have also been taking place in Bedford, Leicester, Mansfield and Middlesbrough. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake has more.
Celebration in Stoke-on-Trent. Just one councillor of thousands finding out their fate. Counting has begun in more than 200 towns, cities and rural areas across England where voters have had their say on who should run local services. The Tories are braced for a tough night, hoping only to limit their losses. And among a handful of very early results, they lost control of Brentwood in Essex, with the Liberal Democrats picking up seats, hoping to make gains elsewhere too, at the Conservatives' expense.
Fantastic result for the Liberal Democrats in one of the safest Tory seats in the country. We've gained 3 seats. We're now up to 17 seats, and the council moves into an overall control. And it's a time of change in Brentwood, and we're really delighted. It's fantastic news.
Labour are looking for a strong showing to prove their lead in the opinion polls can bring winning results. Tamworth in the West Midlands among the places Labour has so far made gains, also taking council seats from the Tories. In a first for elections in England, photo ID was required at polling stations, which left some unable to vote, but it's too soon to say what impact the change has had. Only around a quarter of the councils holding elections are counting votes overnight, so early results won't give anything like the full picture. But in the hours ahead, these local elections will be closely watched as a crucial test of the national political picture. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
And of course, all the local results will be available online. To see who won in your local area, you can use our postcode checker, which is available on the BBC News website and on our app. In other news, Ukraine's Air Force has shot down one of its own drones, which it says had lost control above central Kyiv. There were explosions yesterday evening as air defence tried to shoot it down in an area near the president's office. The Air Force later admitted it was Ukrainian and was destroyed to avoid undesirable circumstances. Members of the biggest rail workers' union, the RMT, have voted to renew its mandate for taking strike action. It's the third such vote in a dispute over pay and conditions, which began last year. It raises the prospect of strikes continuing until nearly the end of this year. A US court has ruled that the singer Ed Sheeran did not copy Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On when composing Thinking Out Loud. The British musician had denied stealing elements of the song for his 2014 worldwide hit. Heirs of Marvin Gaye's co-writer argued that Sheeran, Warner Music Group and Sony Music Publishing owed them money for copyright infringement. Sheeran's legal team had argued that the melodies are different and the elements used in both songs are common in pop music. With the King's coronation fast approaching, people hoping to get the best in-person view on the day are camping in central London tonight, as rehearsals and final preparations take place in and around Westminster Abbey. It's expected hundreds of thousands of people will line the route of the procession to and from the Abbey. It's only a short journey down the Mall and along Whitehall, and people are already positioning to get the best view. Well, we'll be back in an hour with the latest news updates, but for now it's back to our special election night coverage with Laura. And just a reminder, to see who won in your local area, you can use our postcode checker, which is available on the BBC News website and on the app.
Warm welcome back to the Election 2023 studio, where we are watching as results come in from 8,000 individual council seat races around the country, 230 councils up for grabs in England. Let's take a look at the numbers so far. The Conservatives have been losing support, losing 69 seats so far. Labour up by 45. The Liberal Democrats also up by 18. And that gives you a bit of a hint of the overall picture, which, based on where these seats are changing hands, at this stage, it does look like a pretty grim night for the Conservatives, potentially losing 1,000 seats or more. We can see the scene there in Plymouth, where Labour has been doing well. Stoke-on-Trent, we can show you images from there. We've just been hearing from our reporter there. Labour are very hopeful of making gains. The Conservative leaders apparently left the building, which normally suggests in political terms that something's gone badly wrong. And then we can show you also the scene in Leicestershire, where counting is underway. And Bolton too, which has been very keenly fought by the political parties. You can see some smiling Labour faces there. But to underline at the moment the sort of sketch of where things are going is something, a difficult night for the Conservatives with heavy losses. A step forward, but we're not sure about whether or not a very significant stride forward for the Labour Party. So on the current trends, it looks like a significant moment for the Labour Party, but maybe not that really decisive thing that they wanted to see. But the Liberal Democrats doing well. 3:10 in the morning, so there's enough for us to be talking about those general trends, but reminder, not enough to be reaching final conclusions on this. But let's talk to our guests. Jonathan Ashworth's been waiting patiently for the Labour Party, Baroness Kramer for the Liberal Democrats, and we're also now joined by Nikki Aitken, the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party. Nikki, firstly to you, if you end up losing 1,000 seats, as it seems that you are very likely to do, why?
Well, 13 years into power, I was a local councillor for 16 years at Westminster, and I can tell you in 2006 and 2010 I had no issues with getting elected under a Labour government, and in 2014 it was the first time that I was told people weren't voting for me because they didn't like the government. So I think, you know, you see that often in local elections. People can swap because they don't like what's going on nationally.
So and people I think aren't voting for Conservative councillors because they don't like the government.
Well, I think that's a trend that can happen, whether it's when Labour are in power or in the Conservative Party in power. I think what's important is that what happens overnight and into tomorrow morning, we do expect that the independent analysis is that we will lose 1,000 seats. We are, you know, we're not thinking that it's going to be a great night for us, of course, but you know, sadly, there will be some amazing councillors who have worked very hard over the last 4 years who will lose their seats, and I pay tribute to them.
At the beginning of the programme, though, and in the last few days, when lots of different experts, including John Curtice and lots of Conservative politicians, have said privately that actually 1,000 losses, well, that's really at the worst end of expectation. Are you now, as a deputy chair of the party, saying that's what you do expect from what you've seen tonight?
Well, what we've said from the start is, from the analysis, that independents like John Curtice has said, we are expecting around about 1,000.
Well, he didn't say that was a different expert, but I suppose my question is now, from what you've seen tonight, from actual results, from what the trends that are developing suggest, are you now officially as a party are you saying to us you're going to lose 1,000 seats?
Well, I'm not going to predict actually, Laura, because you can't, because we don't know what's going to happen overnight, and more seats will be declared tomorrow. But we're under no illusion that it's going to be a tough night. And understandably, after 13 years, no government after 13 years. We saw it under the Labour last administration losing, Labour councillors losing in their hundreds, if not thousands. So it's part of the, sadly, part of the political roller coaster.
Well, we've all been on the political roller coaster plenty in the last few years, haven't we? Jonathan Ashworth, I mean, the Conservatives seem to be losing a lot, on course to lose a lot. But the story so far is of Tory slump. It's not necessarily of Labour's making huge strides, the kind of strides that you need to make if you're to get to number 10.
Well, it's obviously early days in the election count, even though it's late at night. But it does look promising so far for Labour. But I do agree with Nikki. I think people out there are expressing a verdict on 13 years of Tory government, and it's 13 years of Tory economic failure, with giving us a collapse in living standards, high taxes, and people can't get a GP appointment. But the key thing for Labour is, where are we winning? And I've just heard that we've won a seat in Bolton North East. That's a key marginal constituency at the next election. Very good results so far in Stoke, which, as you know, we have to win at the next general election. Gains in Hartlepool. We would have won the Hartlepool constituency if this was general election night. And remarkable gains across the Midlands in the seats which are the traditional marginals. Tamworth, Redditch, Ashby-de-la-Zouch in northwest Leicestershire. Yeah. I think we would have won one of the Dudley seats tonight. Halesowen and Rowley Regis would have fallen to Labour in a general election tonight. These are the seats that will decide the next general election, not just the red wall and all that. We are making gains in the urban seats, including the urban south, like Aldershot. That's never been a Labour constituency. We would have won that seat tonight.
You mentioned, though, there are two parts of the country where there have been strong local factors. You mentioned Tamworth and North West Leicestershire, where they've both had MPs where there's been controversy around them. There have been local factors on the ground. And, we all know there are important local factors always at play here. But, our data suggests that since last year, there hasn't been any progress in your overall vote share. And that matters, as well as the individual seats that you've just talked about.
Well, let's see where we get to in terms of overall vote share.
But so far, have you seen the kind of overall suggestion of vote that you would like to see that would make you feel, comfortable, we're on our way?
But we are winning in the seats that decide general elections, like Dudley, Halesowen, West Brom, Grimsby, Ipswich, Stevenage. These would return Labour MPs, Labour gains off the Conservatives, if this was a general election night. And they are the seats that will decide the country in the next general election.
But it's not a general election, Laura. And I think...
No, it's not. It's about parties making progress, isn't it?
It will be interesting to see, after all the votes are counted, actually what happened with the share of vote. I think, Westminster, my council, we lost last year, not because Labour were taking our votes, because our vote stayed at home to send a clear message. So
you're going to get a good share of the vote? Is it going to be up?
Look, who knows what's going to happen, Jonathan. But what I'm saying is, from what I've been hearing on the doorsteps, and I've been knocking on a lot of doors, I've been making lots of calls, and the vote is not switching to you or the Lib Dems. Our vote is either they're coming out to vote for us or they're staying at home.
Susan.
Well, it must be switching because we're winning in places all over the place.
No, because they're staying
just won in
home.
Southport, won a seat in Southport, so there must be switches.
Well, maybe they're voting tactically. Who knows?
Well, we don't yet have accurate figures on turnout because we're, 3:16 in the morning, but there were early suggestions that it might be slightly down, but we can't give an accurate picture of that at this stage. Baroness Kramer, Nikki Aiken just suggested that voters are not coming to the Lib Dems, it's just that Tories are staying at home.
Well, I mean, remember, we had 3 parliamentary by-elections, the largest swings from the Conservatives to Liberal Democrat. That's on record, basically, in at least 2 of those seats, huge swings. I think I understand why Nikki makes that claim, but I don't think it's a valid one. I think we are genuinely seeing switches. It's harder to tell because of the lower turnout that you get in local elections. I mean, we'll know more when the blue wall seats start to come in. That won't be until later today or perhaps even not until tomorrow with some of them. I'm hearing some very good news, for example, from Windsor, whereas I understand the Conservative leader that looks on track to lose a seat.
What about decorum? So now Ed Davey and his tractor We've already talked about the tractor. We don't need to talk about the tractor again, Chris, do we? But he launched his campaign in Dacorum. Now, that is a Hertfordshire seat, commuter belt.
Exactly.
Lots of young families there, people who can't afford necessarily to live in London, but moving there. Have you got any information about that?
I don't have any
council tonight?
update on Dacorum, but I mean, it's an area where we've worked, where we certainly have had some very good feedback when we've been out there on the doorstep. It would be pretty striking if we were to take Dacorum. And I think, you know, have some serious consequences because of the change in the boundaries on the parliamentary seats there.
Ed Davies certainly looked like he's enjoying this campaign. I mean, he's, you know, done the tractor, he's done the pulling pints, he's certainly tried very hard, I think visibly, to be very present and to trying to grab attention in a way that has been hard for the Lib Dems in the last few years.
Well, I mean, remember that Ed loves campaigning and he's a great communicator. I mean, he's somebody who's always in conversation, always on the doorsteps, and he really does connect with people. But I think I have to say, I think the party's in that kind of heart as well. I mean, when I look at why we're beginning to do so much better now, I look at a lot of the local parties, the level of activists and the level of activism within the local parties has gone up very significantly. It's a lot of new blood. It's people coming in with some real enthusiasm. And that, in the end, is infectious and it makes a difference. And it's people now in this local election campaigning in their own community. I think that there are a lot of local issues, actually, that are in play. It's just that they're melding with national issues into a general sense of Conservative incompetence on pretty much every front, whether it's local or whether it's national. And that's beginning to have a real impact, I think, on the way that people are making their voting decisions.
Just to chip in, Laura, with a little bit of intelligence and number crunching from John Curtice and his team, just picking up on the conversation that we've just been having. This is where Sir John is looking at these key wards that the BBC keeps an eye on and therefore can compare results coming in tonight with previous elections in those exact same wards at previous rounds of elections. So some comparisons here with 2012, rather wholesome comparison going back over a decade, suggesting in this small clutch of key wards and councils that have been looked at that Labour's share of the overall vote is down by 6 points compared to 2012. So just a straw in the wind that suggests that on share of the vote at least, Labour may be well short of where Ed Miliband was 11 years ago. And of course we know what happened to Ed Miliband come the general election, which was what, 3 years later.
Jonathan, what do you say to that?
Well, it's obviously early days in the election counting, but I would return to the point is that we need to focus on where we'll decide the next general election. And in the areas that will decide the next general election, the results so far are promising. In places like Plymouth, in Ipswich, in Stevenage, in Grimsby, in West Bromwich, in Dudley, in Halesowen, in Aldershot, could be a new target for Labour at the next general election. We're making significant progress. So we're not just winning in the so-called red wall, we're winning in the traditional marginals of the Midlands and the urban south.
The suggestion, though, is that for Jonathan Ashworth, that our viewers know this, it's a hugely discussed thing in the country when it comes to Keir Starmer and where Labour is at now. Given the scale of the Conservative majority in 2019, you don't just have to win in the seats that you can list on 10 of your fingers. You have to win.
List on more than 10, I think,
oh no, I shouldn't have said that. We'll be here all night. We know you've been in politics for a long time.
I've been up a long time, but you know what I mean.
We could all list constituencies. But the point is, you have to do something sort of Herculean. Not just saying, oh, well, here and here we've made some significant, made some significant gains. And I suppose the question that I hear often from your colleagues privately and also from some on the left of your party publicly often is that Keir Starmer, for all that he has got the party on a steady keel, he's made lots of changes, but people say when they've been on the doorstep, lots of your colleagues say to me, I'm sure they say to Chris too, there's no surge in enthusiasm for him. He's not the kind of leader who could really get people motivated and get people out there in the way that would allow you to, scale the Himalayas to get to that swing that would get you into number 10.
I disagree with you. I mean, there is no question that the
Labour
Party...
It's not me saying that. It's your colleagues say that privately. Plenty of them
I disagree with my colleagues. There's no question the Labour Party has a mountain to climb at the next general election. We did get a complete shellacking in the last general election. I'm not going to deny that.
And can you see the summit then on the basis of what we've seen so far tonight?
Yes, because we are making progress in significant areas. We are not just picking up the so-called red wall, which everyone obsesses about in Westminster, you know, where we're making progress tonight in Hartlepool and Stoke. We've made 7 gains in Tamworth. I remember the Tamworth by-election before 1997 when we took it off the Tories. That's how much of a political geek I am. I've been around so long. You know, Redditch, that was Jackie Smith's seat, a 2010 gain. Ashby in northwest Leicestershire, a 2010 gain. These are key marginals across the swathe of the Midlands that we are picking up seats in tonight. So, look, it's early days. You know, there's a long way to go until about 6 p.m. tomorrow when we'll get nearly all the results will be in. But so far, this is looking promising, and I do think it is a wholesale rejection of 13 years of economic failure under the Conservatives. OK, you three, thank you for now. Stick with us, because we're going to look in some more detail at some of those kinds of seats, exactly the ones that Jonathan Ashworth has just been talking about. Rita.
Laura, yes, indeed. Let's take a look at a couple of the councils where the Conservatives have held on, but we've detected differences in the way in which the Labour Party is picking up support. So here you can see the Conservatives on 39% in Basildon and Labour on 29%. And the Conservatives, in fact, picked up a seat here tonight. Labour has improved on its performance from last year and the year before, but it's still quite some way behind the Conservatives, 10 percentage points. So still some way to go in an area where they would really need to be competitive in order to be saying that they are going to be back in power nationally. But I want to compare Basildon to Redditch in the West Midlands, also a Conservative hold, as I said. But look at the difference in the graph here. Labour has a higher share of the vote than the Conservatives. Labour on 44% here and the Conservatives on 39%. Now, you might be asking yourselves, well, how is it that that's still a Conservative council? And this is because the seats are only up in thirds. So it's only a third of the council seats that are being voted on, that have been voted on. So it is quite difficult, actually, for the council to change hands. But if you compare Labour's performance tonight in Redditch with what they did in 2019, you can see the red splodge just down there. Well, I can tell you there are 16 percentage points between their performance 4 years ago and now. So that is the direction of travel that the Labour Party would want to see. Laura.
Rita, thank you very much indeed. Well, a couple of things to bring you just in the last couple of minutes. Someone in the Lib Dems has told me they're confident that they have taken control of Windsor and Maidenhead, where Theresa May's constituency is, as well, of course, Windsor Castle. Very timely to be talking about things that happen in Windsor at the moment with the coronation upcoming. But the Lib Dems are confident that they have taken control of Windsor and Maidenhead. We don't have official figures or confirmation on that yet, but that would be something they would be very gleeful about. It's been Conservative since 2007, and the Lib Dems did hold it in 2003, but that would be an achievement for them that they would be delighted, I'm sure, to talk about. Let's show you, though, a result that we can confirm. Plymouth, that city in the southwest. Now, we've talked a lot about Plymouth. We've heard from our reporter, Martin Oates, on the ground, and we can say now that Labour has gained Plymouth Council. There are still 2 seats to declare. They're still counting there, but Labour has 29 so far. The Conservatives have 18, independents and smaller parties. Oh, they've just disappeared. I think that was on 5, but we've gone straight on to the seat change. So look at this, Labour gaining 4, but the Conservatives losing 7. Now that is another one of those changes, those shapes of things that we've seen. Tory losses being the bigger move than Labour gains, but that is significant nonetheless, and Labour will be very pleased to gain Plymouth. Let's look at the vote share. Labour on 44%, the Tories way behind on 25%, Independents on 16%, the Greens on 9%, and let's look at the all-important change since 2019, the last time these seats were fought in May 2019. Labour up 7%, but the Conservatives down 11%. Now that result will make Labour very happy. Martin Oates, Chris on the ground earlier, told us it was going to be a wipeout. and Labour have gained it, and they will be very pleased. Why in a seat like that?
For two reasons. One, the margin, as you were looking at, as we were exploring there on the graph, just the scale, going back to my kind of pet word of the night of extent, because it points to an extensive gain as far as Labour is concerned. And then secondly, because of the overlaying of maps that is happening all night at the moment and all day on Friday, where the parties are comparing their performance in local government with key electoral battlegrounds as far as Westminster constituencies are concerned. And that is absolutely the case there. And so that is why you will hear Labour being pretty excited about it.
And that city has right now a Conservative MP, a prominent Conservative MP, the Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, and Labour MPs. And that, whether it's Plymouth or there's a similar sort of pattern in Portsmouth, Ipswich also is the same, where you have a kind of split city.
Yeah.
That's why these council elections will be looked at and make MPs feel nervous on the Conservative benches.
Yeah, split cities are highly contested cities, aren't they? They're places, well, whether it's cities, towns or more rural areas, they're the most keenly fought over, that the parties are so desperate to be seen to be making an impression on, not least because clearly they're places where they want to make gains come the general election, but they are also places because of that where huge amount of focus has been delivered by so many of them to try and ensure they can make those gains. So in other words, it's a test of whether their whole infrastructure is working. Yeah. Are they getting good bang for their buck for their investment in campaigning on the ground? So it matters massively, and from the results we see tonight will be all sorts of decisions taken about where additional effort is put or where effort is switched to on the basis of the sentiments that are picked up.
So we can show you some pictures there in Plymouth. Activists there. You can see smiley Labour faces out the front. Not much sign of many Conservatives there. Let's look at Stoke-on-Trent. You can see, again, it's that same Labour happy crowd we saw hugging each other a bit earlier on. They're still having a good night. Let's look at Bolton. I think that is one of the local MPs. Yes, it is. That's, yeah. Yep. Conservatives chatting. Hard to read what's really going on, but we know that is somewhere where Labour
particularly the back of the head.
Particularly the back of the head. Oh, well, we can have a go, Chris. Come on, we can have a go. Any minute now, I'll be showing dogs at polling stations rather than looking at the top of people's heads. But then we can take a look at what's happening in Leicestershire. A count there, carrying on. Looks like they might almost have finished, but there is still some counting going on in the bottom right of the frame. Let's go back to Plymouth. We were just hearing about that critical race there where Labour has gained control of the council in one of those split cities. I'm hoping that we can talk to the minister there, the Conservative MP, Johnny Mercer. We can see him. I'm hoping he can hear us. Minister, thanks very much indeed for joining us. What went wrong?
Look, it's been a really terrible night for us here in Plymouth. I think there's a number of factors at play. I think locally it's been very difficult. The Conservative group here has been through a very difficult time. We've seen that reflected on the doors in the campaign, and we've seen that reflected in the results tonight. But, you know, we take it on the chin and, you know, we keep going forward. I think there's really positive stuff happening at a national level, and we need to redouble our efforts and make sure that we continue to work hard for people here in Plymouth.
Well, thank you for contending there with a huge cheer, which I can't see, but I'm assuming is going up from Labour activists in the room as the gain of the council is actually confirmed. You said there it's been a really terrible night in Plymouth. Has it also at this stage been a terrible night from what you've seen for the Conservatives nationally?
Oh, look, I don't know about that. I think we were expecting pretty heavy losses. You know, no government at this term in 13 years in has ever had more local councillors to lose. I think it was always going to be difficult. The Prime Minister, you know, said himself yesterday it was going to be difficult. We all know that. So in some ways, you know, some of that's to be expected. But yeah, here in Plymouth, it has been bad. And you know, first and foremost, above everything, we're all constituency MPs. We represent the areas we're from. We're proud to represent. And in my area tonight, it's been a bad night, and we need to take it on the chin and come back stronger for next year.
But when you, as a local MP in a city that's very closely fought, see Conservative support dropping by 11%, that must make you nervous.
Oh, look, I'm always nervous down here. I think that's why I went for a seat down here, because this is where I'm from. I'm proud of it. I like the fight. I'm up for the fight. It's going to be a fight next year, and I'm happy with that. You know, I think it's not a question of self-preservation. It's about getting out there, listening to people, and delivering for them. And I still believe the Conservatives clearly are the best party to do that nationally and locally. But we haven't won that argument tonight. That is democracy, and we take it on the chin, and we'll go again tomorrow.
Johnny, our colleague Martin Oates, who's probably loitering somewhere in the same room as you right now, the BBC's political editor in the South West, has tweeted saying that a Conservative candidate in Plymouth told him they've been drawing trees on the ballot papers, which makes a change from phallic symbols. Spot of humour at 3:33 in the morning, but give us a sense of how, in a local sense, how big this whole row over trees in Plymouth has been, and how wounding that has been to your party.
Yeah, I mean, it's a disaster, isn't it? You know, the whole escapade, if you like. You know, Labour have kind of benefited from this, right? But they signed off that plan. But the way the Conservative Council did it, particularly at night, you know, I obviously would have done it differently. I think 4 Conservative leaders in 2 years in the local council group hasn't helped. I think that's a big lesson from tonight, is that people don't vote for divided parties. And, you know, we have obviously had a very challenging 2022 at a national level as well. We need to learn from that, pull together, pull hard. We've got a good message to get out there, but we need to get out there, win places like Plymouth and win the country in next year's general election.
It sounds that you do want Rishi Sunak, therefore, to step things up.
Oh, look, I think, I've been in and out of government, right? I've been in and out under different prime ministers, okay? Rishi Sunak is a different class. He is capable, smart, professional, empathetic, strong leader, and the sort of strong leader this country needs at this time. And it's down to people like me and others to go out and advocate for him and make sure other people see that and understand that and feel that through his policies and our policies as a Conservative team, and improve, you know, their lives at the moment at a very difficult time. And I'm up for the challenge, and my colleagues are up for the challenge. You know, if it was easy, everyone would do it, but it's going to be a fight. I'm up for the fight, we're up for the fight. You know, we'll take tonight on the chin, and we'll get on with it. It's a new day tomorrow, and we'll get on with it for next year.
But what do you think it's going to take for people in Plymouth to feel the benefit of what you back as Rishi Sunak's plan? Because clearly in Plymouth tonight, people are not feeling it. Clearly they're feeling the opposite. They're feeling they don't want any more Conservatives in their city.
Well, firstly, I think there's really strong local issues down here that we've highlighted already. But secondarily, I think you know, inflation predicted to be at 2.9% by the end of the year is a big deal, right? That is people's mortgages. That's all sorts of things going on. You know, car loan payments and all sorts that really affect people down here in Plymouth. So you know, people are going to feel the benefit of getting a grip of inflation. People are going to feel the benefit of better public services. You know, we've seen huge improvements in public services down here in the last 4 to 5 months after a very difficult post-COVID recovery. So look, I think these things are gradual. We need to keep going. We need to pull together. We need to keep going. That's what we need to do. We don't, you know, need some drastic change of course. You know, I found a very warm reception for Rishi on the doorstep, to be honest with you, and I've always you know, called it straight. Whoever's the Prime Minister at the time, I found a very warm reception for him, and you know, people want him to do well. They want us to do well. Keir Starmer, they don't want to vote for Keir Starmer. You know, they don't see what he stands for. They don't have any idea what he does or who he is. But you know, I can understand why they're cross with us. We've had a difficult 2022 nationally. We need to give people something to vote for. I said that when I was first elected in 2015. We need to go out there, have the argument, have the fight, and give people something to vote for. And I'm confident we can do that in the year ahead. OK, Johnny Mercer, Veterans Minister and Plymouth MP, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme live from Plymouth. A big result for Labour there, Jonathan Ashworth, in Plymouth.
Oh yeah, very, very pleased with that result tonight in Plymouth. It's not only that we hold one of the parliamentary seats, but it is a marginal seat we hold. And of course, we're targeting the other parliamentary seats in Plymouth, Johnny Mercer's seat there. So I've not seen how the gains distribute across the whole of the two constituencies. But taking that council is a very significant result for us tonight, and we're very pleased with that.
Well, you can see there again, very happy Labour faces in Stoke. They're the former 2 Stoke MPs who both lost in 2019. One of them in the House of Lords, Gareth Snell, there with a clipboard handily at a count. Everybody's always got clipboards, but Labour looking very happy about what's happening in Stoke. So maybe we'll check back in with Leslie Glinka in a few minutes to see if there's confirmation of what's happened on the ground there. In terms though with Plymouth, Jonathan Ashworth, I mean, there was a very strong local problem that caused huge problems for the Conservatives. And Johnny Mercer then said people didn't do this because they were feeling happy about Keir Starmer. They were just hacked off with the Tories.
Well, they've just voted for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. So he's obviously wrong on that. Because if that was the case, Labour wouldn't have made these gains there.
Nikki?
It didn't help that the council felled 100 trees in March. And, you know, look, Plymouth, Corbyn won Plymouth in 2018 when he wasn't winning very much. So Plymouth is one of those swing councils. But definitely the trees would have played a massive part in today's election.
But it was interesting what Johnny Mercer was saying, though. I mean, he made very clear his own personal support for Rishi Sunak, but he said, you know, people aren't feeling it. He said, we're going to have to work hard for people to feel the benefit of what he believes you're doing is the right thing. What is it, do you think, that is not translating into support for you tonight? What is it that is translating into such a decline?
Well, we've been in power for 13 years and it's always going to be a difficult time for local elections when a government's been in power that long.
So is that too long then? Is that
no,
just
not at all. But, you know, what we've been through over the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic, with the war in Ukraine, which has had a major effect on energy prices. And also, you know, Laura, the psychodrama that was been going on in the Conservative Party has not helped. And, you know, our voters have told me that. But I do think we now have got under Rishi Sunak, and interestingly, on the doorsteps, people are saying to me, you know, we're not voting for you this time. And I say, well, about the Prime Minister, how do you feel about him? They really rate him. And, you know, it is about his 5 priorities. It is about halving inflation. It is about growing the economy, reducing the debt, cutting the waiting list and stopping the boats. Those are his 5 very clear priorities.
But can you say credibly that voters are won over by Rishi Sunak if, as things stand now, you're on course to one of your worst ever performances? Can you say that credibly?
Absolutely, because it is very, very different in the national picture, and we are now on track with Rishi, with, as I said, his 5 top priorities, so that the public can benchmark what we are saying by what we deliver.
And when will you then think, well, we can see now that the public is on board? Because the national opinion polls put you miles behind. Real votes tonight are putting you miles behind.
But we are still making gains. Look, we in Harlow, the Labour Party are not making the gains they should be making if they're going to take the general election next year. Look at what happened. They're nowhere near at the moment, and it's an early in the process.
Not that early anymore. It's 20 to 4, but lots of results still to come.
It feels very, very late, believe me. But you know, they're not at the moment making the gains they did in '95 under Blair. So let's see. Let's see what happens.
I'm calling this as the middle of the night, neither late nor early. Nikki, are you effectively saying, just reading between the lines of your answers to Laura over the last couple of minutes, that this is Boris Johnson and Liz Truss's fault?
I think it's the fact that we didn't have a great year last year. I think Johnny said that. 2022 was not a great year for the Conservative Party, but we've put that behind us. We've got to look for the future. The public deserve to allow to have a government that gets on with the job, and that is what Rishi has done. The progress he's made in such a short time with the Belfast Agreement, with a much better, productive, constructive relationship now with the EU and with the French, and the agreements he's had with Macron over the small boats. What we're doing on trade.
Expect though that after, if it turns out to be a really rough 24 hours for you, would voters just expect you to carry on regardless? Are they not sending a message that wants some sort of change?
I think under Rishi Sunak, and I think if you look at the polls, Rishi's outpolling Keir Starmer. People do not really believe or understand what Keir stands for.
The measure there is almost, Keir Starmer is very often ahead. Occasionally, sometimes Rishi Sunak is a little bit ahead, but it is not the case that Rishi Sunak is always ahead of Keir Starmer.
But where we've
come from, just to make that clear to viewers, that's not what the numbers say.
Well, I think we have made an awful lot of progress under Rishi Sunak over the last 6 months, and he is he's delivering what he has promised so far. As I said, with the Belfast Agreement, with the trade agreements we're doing now outside the EU, and the much more constructive relationship we've now got with our EU partners.
OK, Susan, I'm listening to these two going at it hammer and tongs because the Labour versus Tory debate does tend to dominate. But the Lib Dems, do you think, if the results trend tonight continues tomorrow, do you think that actually it could translate into a much more significant performance at the next general election?
I think it could. I mean, you know, the pattern that we saw with those by-elections. But I mean, I have to say, you know, looking at my own briefing, if we take Windsor and Maidenhead, that is beyond expectations that we had from the beginning of the evening. You have to understand the Conservatives had twice the number of councillors that we did on Windsor.
And they've told me
so
they're
it's huge.
Confident that they've taken
That's
it.
what I understand. And we'll see when those other seats come in. Look, I mean, we've just had a governor of the Bank of England tell people they need to get used to being poorer. Now, that's what the government has managed to deliver. That's the experience that people actually have on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you know, as Liberal Democrats, we're not going to sit there passively and let that be the future that the country is facing. So we really feel it's important that we get our messages across, that, you know, we can actually make movement on the economy, shore it up by getting much closer to Europe in some ways, that we can make those kinds of international differences that give us new opportunity. We can tackle the problems in the health service. I mean, we won North Shropshire because we finally got an MP or candidate, then now MP for North Shropshire, who spoke about the problem with ambulance waiting times. Nothing was being done to deal with that problem until Helen Morgan got out there and began campaigning and repeating it over and over again in Parliament. I mean, we will campaign on those key issues that are absolutely critical to people's everyday lives.
I was just saying, one of your colleagues just texted me saying just about the overall Lib Dem performance so far. We will exceed the expectations of all the pollsters. This is a great night for us. I wonder what you put that down to, the Lib Dem progress so far. How much it is about policy and issues and where we find ourselves economically, and how much it's about organisation, because I hear from a lot of your colleagues that there's been a real shift in the focus of organisation, real geographical concentration on areas where you're competitive, not spreading yourself too thinly. Are we seeing the product of that shift in strategy, or is this more about policy?
Frankly, I think it's both. You have to organise yourself well, and particularly when you're a small party and you don't have the financial resources, close to the financial resources of the other parties, and also you can't get airtime. I mean, somebody had said earlier the reason why Ed Davey, you know, does dramatic things like get on a tractor is because otherwise the media won't cover him. You know, we had huge gains. That's in the last lot of local elections. We won 200 seats, more than anybody else. And I bet anybody who was watching the media on that day didn't get that point at all and never even heard it. So we have to make our own climate, if you like. We have to make our own weather. And I think the party is becoming much more effectively organised. But it's also very much this sort of feeding from the grassroots. I talked about the activists who really have the pulse of the communities they live in on both the local issues and the national issues. And I can see that coming through in the sort of detailed kind of fights that we're having in Parliament, the issues on which we're standing strong. You know, whether it's everything from trying to get some control back over the financial system, so whether it's trying to make sure that we have that, you know, we don't turn into an authoritarian state with some of the public order bills.
What could this mean for you at a general election, do you think? Could you double the number of seats you've got?
I don't have I'm not a psophologist, so I don't have my finger on the pulse. I suspect also the focus, one of the things we've done is focus on the next step. And the next step has been these local elections, backing up our activists in the places where they are, where we know that we're able to get our message out to local people, and then look to see what the response is.
Okay. All right. Okay, all three of you, thank you very much for now. And Susan, we're glad to have you here in the studio. What looks like it could be a very healthy night indeed for the Liberal Democrats. They've certainly got a lot to cheer about at the moment. So let's look at some of the battleground seats where some decisive results could come in the next few hours. Reeta, what can we expect?
Well, Laura, let me just show you where the parties stand at the moment in terms of councillors. Conservatives down 71 seats, Labour up 49 and the Liberal Democrats up 20. And in answer to Laura's question, this is how our councils to watch overnight, how the screen looks now. So as those of you who've been following us through the hours will know, Brentwood is a Conservative loss. They had a majority of 3 before the night started, and they've lost that to no overall control. They've also lost Tamworth in Staffordshire, and as Laura reminded you earlier during the programme, this is where Chris Pincher is an MP. He was a Conservative, is now an independent, and he played a role in a sequence of events that eventually triggered Boris Johnson's resignation. We can't know how much of a role that played, but it may well have done. By contrast, over here in the hung section, Plymouth, which was under no overall control, that is now a Labour gain. So you see that flashing red, and in the red column here, all those councils which started the night as Labour. There's a whole lot of red there which indicate Labour holds, and for the councils that are in white and grey, they are still counting. Under the Liberal Democrat column, Hull is a Labour hold, and they've consolidated their position there, so they're terribly pleased about that, of course. And just one word about these councils here at the bottom under the hung section. Remember, I told you at the beginning of the evening that Rochford in Essex, West Lindsey in Boston, both of them in Lincolnshire, although they're all in the hung section, they were actually Conservative councils 4 years ago, and they became hung through defection. So we were going to watch and see if the Conservatives were able to take them back. Well, Rochford, they have failed there because Rochford has stayed hung. So that's how it's looking at 10 to 4 in the morning. I'll update you again soon.
Thank you very much indeed, Rita. Well, let's go straight to one of the councils that we've talked about a bit. We've been hearing from our reporter on the ground in North West Leicestershire, and that's somewhere where the Tories are doing worse than they expected, we think. We don't have final numbers there, but let's speak to Virg Rakiki, who's the former chairman of the Conservative Party in that part of the world. We were hearing earlier from our reporter on the ground that the Conservatives were braced to lose seats they hadn't expected to. Can you just tell us what you think is going on?
Well, I think what's happening now is national politics appear to be in the minds of most voters. Excuse me. We're obviously very, very disappointed. We did expect a change, a slight change, but certainly not the whirlwind gains that Labour have made tonight. We certainly didn't expect that. But the biggest problem I see is that there's a tremendous amount of knowledge that is now being swept away by the Labour group. The Conservatives have been the leading group in North West Leicestershire for the past 20 odd years, and all of the councillors have tremendous knowledge, and now they've got to start afresh. And I'm afraid that the officers may well be a little bit concerned that most of the new ward members know absolutely nothing of how to run the council. So it is rather unfortunate that people have voted politically, nationally, rather than at a district level. We've kept the council tax. We haven't increased the council tax in 14 years. But I'm afraid now the Labour group will be increasing the council tax, so people will be paying more, I'm afraid. And yes, I'm disappointed. I love the area. I've loved working for the general public, and it's a sad day for quite a lot of Conservative councillors.
And Mr Rakiki, we don't actually have confirmation of the final results there, but are you confirming to us then that the Conservatives have lost control of the council? Has Labour actually got a majority, or has it gone to nobody being in overall control but Labour the biggest group?
Well, the counting is still going on, so we're not really sure whether the Labour will have a controlling group, but we, the Conservatives, certainly have not. And I suppose another governing factor is the fact that our MP has been a little bit too sort of outspoken and not considered what he's been saying as to what the effect will have on the local electorate. So we've not been given any favours. We've been dealt a pretty bad hand the past 3-4 years from Boris, Liz Truss, and now Rishi Sunak, and hopefully Rishi Sunak will put us on the right track again. But we are really hard working, the Conservatives are, and we love our district, and of course we're going to be back again before long.
And you refer there to the controversy over Andrew Bridgen, who was booted out of the Conservative Party as an MP, so isn't even serving as a Conservative MP anymore in your part of the world. You say for 3 or 4 years, though, you've had a pretty bad hand from the National Party. How confident are you, or not?
Oh, absolutely.
About Rishi Sunak's ability to turn it round? Because from what's happened tonight, I think some of your colleagues might have a big question mark about that.
No, I think, to be fair, this is a protest vote. I know that a lot of my electorate are very happy with the way we in the district have run the council. We Conservatives have run the council. But it's a protest on a national level, as you've obviously noticed. Labour are sweeping across the board all over the country. So we're taking a certain amount of satisfaction knowing that we have done a good job. We have really looked after our electorate. We're building more and more affordable homes. We've built council houses. We're really trying to look after everyone in our district. But unfortunately, on a national level, we've been let down.
That Rishi Sunak can turn that around?
I would think so. I believe so. I think he's committed to trying to get things back on course for us. We've had, as I said, 3 or 4 bad years. COVID really knocked the country about. Whether we handled it in the right way or the wrong way, I really don't know. I'm not as politically minded as an MP is. But we did the best we could under the circumstances that we had no control over. And unfortunately, I think that a lot of people now have lost that work ethic and not getting back to working really hard and getting the country back on track again. We're sliding downhill, and I don't think that any government can put it right. It's up to the people of the country to set about it, put their barrow down and get on with it and get back to work, and let's raise the country to the level it was 10 years ago.
OK, Verdra Kiki, the former chair of the North West Leicestershire Conservatives, thank you very much for giving us your time. I know it's a difficult night for you, so we appreciate you speaking to us here on BBC News. Now, we're not that far away from the news at 4 o'clock, believe it or not. It is nearly 4 a.m. But we are going to check in for some interesting views with 2 people who know the 2 main parties well. Laura Dunn, who was a special advisor to various Conservative ministers, and Andrew Fisher, who was the former Director of Policy for Jeremy Corbyn. Laura, just let's start with you. Listening to that local councillor, that local activist in North West Leicestershire, feeling clearly so let down by the National Party.
Yeah, I think when you look at the past year, it's definitely been a very tumultuous time for the Conservative Party, and that perhaps is playing out now when we look at these results. I think, you know, it's still not a clear-cut picture, even at 4 minutes to 4 in the morning. What I've heard from colleagues who've been out campaigning across the country, that there's still, you know, a soft, undecided vote, and some voters have actually felt a bit meh about things. I think we've seen some of the messaging a little bit muddied as well, with national issues in terms of the NHS, cost of living, etc., being woven into that dialogue. But, you know, I think the Prime Minister has done a really good job in trying to stabilise the ship since he took office. But it's clear there's much more work to be done. And I think, you know, as soon as the ballot boxes and the polling stations shut at 10 o'clock last night, the campaign for the general election next year, definitely it's underway.
And just as we're chatting, I just want to show you results come in. The Middlesbrough mayor is another Labour gained from the independent Andy Preston, who's been in charge there for the last few years. So that's a gain for Labour in the northeast of England, the kind of part of the world where they wanted to show evidence of progress. Just to let you know, the Middlesbrough mayor is not a big, all-powerful mayor like the Manchester or the London mayor, but of course these races still do matter, and that is a gain for the Labour Party. Let's put that then to Andrew Fisher, who was a critical person in Jeremy Corbyn's team. I mean, it's a dilemma perhaps for you on the left, who's wanted to see Keir Starmer be more radical, putting forward or sticking to some of the policies that he offered in his leadership campaign, you might say, and yet Labour is making distinct progress, Andrew.
Yeah, it's a good night for Labour. There's no two ways about that, and that's a good thing. You know, we're all, or at least I am a Labour Party member and have been for 26 years. So, you know, I'm very pleased that Labour's doing well. I guess the question is, and it remains, and it's true of the national polling as well, is how much of this is the collapse of the Conservatives and how much of it is a kind of enthusiasm for Labour. And I think what we see across the country and what I've heard back from canvassers right across the country is, you know, there's definitely a suppression of the Tory vote. A lot of Tory voters haven't turned out today. We know that. That's, you know, the turnout figures are quite low. There's not, you know, any sense of a great enthusiasm for Labour. In some council areas, of course, there is, but overall, not so much. So, you know, it's a good result. It's put us on a good path. I think a lot of what Jonathan Ashworth was saying to you earlier about if you look at the seats that, where the councils map onto parliamentary seats, Labour's making pretty good gains in important places. So it's a good night for Labour. There's no problem about that. But the question is, when it comes to a general election, you're not talking about turnouts of 15, 20, 25%. You're talking about trying to get 65, 70% out. And then you've got to enthuse people. You've got to give people a reason to vote. So I think there needs to be a lot more definition from Keir Starmer's Labour Party. I'll stick to my guns on that. But and also you've just got to meet the scale of the challenge. Look at the crisis in the NHS. Look at the crisis in the pollution in our seas and rivers. Look at the state of the economy and people's wages. Labour's got to have answers to those big questions in a general election. But these are very good results.
What about, Andrew Fisher, that recent ditching of the plan to scrap tuition fees for students in England? Is that the kind of thing that you would like to see Keir Starmer recommit to?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, education should be free. That's a principle that most Labour Party members have, you know, whether they're on the right or the left of the party, to be honest. And it's wrong that the, you know, tuition fees came in the first place and then that they were trebled under the coalition government of the Lib Dems and Tories. So, yes, they definitely should stick to that. You know, Labour brought in free tuition in Scotland in 2000 when in coalition with the Liberal Democrats. So this is something we've done before. We should do it in government UK-wide as well.
OK, Andrew Fisher and Laura Dunn, thank you very much indeed for joining us and for waiting patiently until we were able to get to you. Thank you both very much. It will be interesting in the coming days, depending on the final results, of course, how much that debate about enthusiasm for the Starmer project comes to life inside the Labour Party. But it's certainly been plenty of life in the conversation with Jonathan Ashworth and Baroness Kramer, who've been with us for the last little while. You two are both going to now depart. Nikki, don't go anywhere. You'll have some new comrades at the desk in a second or two. Before we go to the news, I'm going to give you the tally on our giant tower. I like doing this. Labour have increased their council tally by 52 seats with 361 now. The Tories losing 73. The Liberal Democrats, very chipper, having gained 20 seats, and the Greens gaining 10. There's some interesting things in different parts of the country for the Greens that we're keeping an eye on as well. Overall, the sketched out headline, bad night for the Tories, really pretty heavy losses for them. Steps forward for Labour, but maybe not the significant strides that they need to get to number 10, but a good night so far from the Liberal Dems. But these are the early headlines, tons more results to come, more of them after the news with Luxby Go Pal.
Hello, here's your BBC News summary. Results are coming in from the local elections across large parts of England, with the Conservatives losing control of Brentwood and Tamworth councils. In Tamworth, Labour gained 7 seats, while in Brentwood, the Tories lost in 3 wards to the Liberal Democrats. The Lib Dems needed to win 5 seats there to take control of the council. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake has more.
Celebration in Stoke-on-Trent. Seat by seat, councillors are finding out their fate. Here, it's Labour that are making gains. Counting has begun in more than 200 towns, cities and rural areas across England where voters have had their say on who should run local services. The Tories are braced for a tough night, hoping only to limit their losses. And among the early results, they lost control of Brentwood in Essex, where the Liberal Democrats made gains.
Fantastic result for the Liberal Democrats in one of the safest Tory seats in the country. We've gained 3 seats. We're now up to 17 seats, and the council moves into an overall control. And it's a time of change in Brentwood, and we're really delighted. It's fantastic news.
Worcester is one of many places where control of the council hasn't changed hands, but Conservatives saw their support slip away.
Individual wards will be impacted by individual issues, but I have to say, I guess the general theme is the backdrop of Westminster has not played out well on the doorstep, and we've been held to account.
Labour are looking for a strong showing to prove their lead in opinion polls can bring winning results. Tamworth in the West Midlands, among the places the party has so far taken significant numbers of seats from the Conservatives. In a first for elections in England, photo ID was required at polling stations, which left some unable to vote, but it's too soon to say what impact the change has had. Only around a quarter of the councils holding elections are counting votes overnight, so early results won't give anything like the full picture. But in the hours ahead, these local elections will be closely watched as a crucial test of the national political picture. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
Well, within the past hour, Labour has celebrated taking control of Plymouth Council after the Conservatives lost 8 seats. As Labour cheered, the Veterans Minister Johnny Mercer, who's an MP in the city, expressed his disappointment.
Look, it's been a really terrible night.
Hunt.
There's a number of factors at play. I think locally it's been very difficult. The Conservative group here has been through a very difficult time. We've seen that reflected on the doors in the campaign, and we've seen that reflected in the results tonight. But, you know, we take it on the chin, and, you know, we keep going forward. I think there's really positive stuff happening at a national level, and we need to redouble our efforts and make sure that we continue to work hard for people here in Plymouth.
Conservative MP Johnny Mercer there. And of course, all the local results will be available online. To find out who won in your local area, you can use our postcode checker, available on the BBC News website and on our app. In other news, Ukraine's Air Force has shot down one of its own drones, which it says had lost control above central Kyiv. There were explosions yesterday evening as air defence tried to shoot it down in an area near the president's office. The Air Force later admitted it was Ukrainian and was destroyed to avoid what it called undesirable circumstances. Members of the biggest rail workers' union, the RMT, have voted to renew its mandate for taking strike action. It's the third such vote in a dispute over pay and conditions which began last year. It raises the prospect of strikes continuing until nearly the end of this year. A US court has ruled that the singer Ed Sheeran did not copy Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On when composing Thinking Out Loud. The British musician had denied stealing elements of the song for his 2014 worldwide hit. Heirs of Marvin Gaye's co-writer argued that Sheeran, Warner Music Group and Sony Music Publishing owed them money for copyright infringement. Sheeran's legal team had argued that the melodies are different and the elements used in both songs are common in pop music. With the King's coronation fast approaching, people hoping to get a good in-person view on the day are camping in central London tonight, as rehearsals and final preparations take place in and around Westminster Abbey. It's expected hundreds of thousands of people will line the route of the procession to and from the Abbey. It's only a short journey down the Mall and along Whitehall, and people are already positioning to get the best view. We'll be back in an hour with the latest news updates, but for now it's back to our special election night coverage with Laura. And just a reminder, to see who won in your local area, you can use our postcode checker, which is available on the BBC News website and on our app.
And a very warm welcome back to the Election 2023 studio here at BBC News. First of all, I'd like to welcome two new guests to the studio. Nikki Aiken's still here with us, Conservative Deputy Chair, but we've been joined by Lord Fox, Liberal Democrat. Chris, nice to have you with us. And Peter Kyle, Labour's shadow spokesperson on Northern Ireland. We're pleased to have you all here just after 4 a.m. With me, of course, is our political editor, Chris Fox. Chris Fox is over there. Chris Mason is over here. It was just when you put your head down to the laptop, anyone would think it's 4:06. We know what the headlines are being sketched out as from what we have seen so far, but health warning, health warning, health warning. Of course, there are plenty more results to come tonight, many more results to come tomorrow. But so far, what we have been seeing, what our numbers are suggesting, is a very bad night for the Conservatives, a decent night for Labour with progress, but maybe not huge progress, but a happy night for the Liberal Democrats too. So let's talk to Reeta about what some of those projections might look like and how they go into history comparatively.
Well, here we have it, Laura. So this is it says our estimate, but it's our projection based on the results so far of the number of councillors that each of the main parties might expect to have at the end of this election. Now, I must say that this is a projection, so it is based on the pattern of the results so far. But given what we know, it is looking as if Labour might be in the region of gaining around 400 councillors. The Conservatives could be looking at losses of over 1,000, and the Liberal Democrats could be looking at picking up around 260 more seats. So if you look at the actual graph, you see we've got our dotted lines projecting into 2023, because we're not saying this is exactly what's going to happen. This is what we think will happen based on the results that we have. But you see that the red dot is overtaking the blue dot, and that would mean, if this did come to pass, it would mean that Labour would become the largest party in local government for the first time since, if you go all the way back to 2002, that is the last time that Labour was the largest party in local government. If the results do give this sort of scenario, it means that the Conservatives are at risk of losing the sort of worst case scenario figures that they have been giving in the run up to this election, which is a loss of around 1,000 seats. And for the Liberal Democrats, well, we know that they have been having a good election so far and potentially putting on around 260 councillors, with a slight improvement on their performance on last year and also on 2019, the last time that these seats were fought. And they did well in 2019, so that is all encouraging for them. But I suppose you do also have to look back at our graph to see how well they were doing before they went into power with the Conservatives in 2010, where they were scoring really rather higher. So a good night for the Lib Dems, but as with everything in politics and in life, it's all relative. Laura.
Thank you very much, Reeta. Well, it is all relative, and it is also only the case if the current trends of the night continue. So losses for the Conservatives could speed up, they could slow down. Gains for the Labour Party could speed up, they could slow down. You get my point. That is a projection if the trends continue as we've seen so far this evening. So bear that in mind. But it absolutely does bear examination and bear some more conversation. So let's go to Sir John, who's been furiously trying to work all of this out. These are fascinating numbers, aren't they, Sir John? And they put the Conservatives beyond what were their worst expectations, potentially, if it goes on like this.
Yeah, maybe. Let's not over-egg the pudding. I think the point.
I would never do that.
The point which is simply make is that, you know, as of 4 o'clock this morning, with 75% of the results still to be counted, we cannot say that the Conservatives are clearly not at risk of suffering 1,000 seats. At the moment, we cannot rule out the possibility that that is what might happen, and that, you know, certainly the rate of loss overnight at around 1 in 3 does indeed take you to around or possibly even slightly over the 1,000 mark. So let's be careful here. We're not saying that's what is going to happen. We're simply, I think, really above all saying to those of our inveterate viewers who are not only now with us at 4 o'clock in the morning, but also expect to be with us at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, when we might know the answer to this, that indeed they may discover when they are still watching, if they haven't fallen asleep, that the Conservatives might have lost 1,000 seats.
John, I think if people are still watching us at 4 a.m, they are definitely going to be watching at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, because that is proper
well, they might have a job to go to do it, Laura,
well, then they can look at it on their phone, I'm sure. They'll be watching it under the desk. Let's get you then to respond to the numbers we can show our viewers about what's happened in key wards. So the change since 2019, remember May 2019, not the general election 19, Labour up 7%, the Conservatives down 1%, Lib Dems up 1%.
Yep.
Change since last year, 2022, the Conservatives down 5%, Labour only up 0.1% at this point in the proceedings. So the kind of increases in share that Labour might expect to wake up to in the morning if things carry on like this are potentially not then the persuasive kinds of things you were talking about at the beginning of the night, that double-digit kind of lead in national projected share that they would require to be sure of victory on the way to number 10.
That doesn't quite follow, Laura, because that -5 figure for the Conservatives in terms of the lead, means that the lead of Labour over the Conservatives is probably going to be somewhat wider than the 5-point lead that Labour enjoyed in the projected national share last year. It's just a reminder that in the context of local elections, at least, where it looks as though on tonight's evidence that the Liberal Democrats have edged up a bit better, maybe as a result are going to put in their best performance since 2010, that the Greens, although probably doing no more than holding their own overall since 2019, but actually increasing in wards where they were previously strongest, that they're also taking their share of the spoils. That we, at least in English local government, is different from Westminster. Westminster, at least in terms of MPs from England and Wales, is still dominated by Conservative and Labour. Not true of Scotland, of course. But English local government is not dominated by Conservative and Labour, and certainly is much less dominated by Conservative and Labour than it was in the days when Tony Blair was able to get something like 46% in the projected national share. The spoils are divided rather more evenly, and as a result, therefore, it's rather more difficult for Labour to make the kind of score in local government elections that we're getting in national opinion polls. But it's equally also more difficult for the Conservatives to do as well as they're doing in national polls. And let's just remember how, on the numbers so far, the Conservatives are doing somewhat less well than even the disaster of May 2019 under Theresa May's leadership.
OK, so John, thank you very much indeed for keeping us right. And we mustn't compare apples and pears. I've been properly told off. Absolutely right.
Yeah,
he's the man with the numbers. But Chris, overall, I mean, from what we know, the trends are suggesting at this stage, there's still going to be pressure on Keir Starmer, perhaps.
Yeah, because there will be, because of momentum, because of that sense that because they were so a million miles ahead in the opinion polls after the kind of Tory implosion of the tail end of last year. Yes, they have narrowed a little bit. That any gap that exists at the end of today, when all of the results are in, between where Labour's opinion poll leads have been and where they may end up, if there is a gap there, that is a gap into which a sort of frisson of nerve can settle for Labour, because, and we've said it before, but we should underline it, the mountain that they face at the next general election is absolutely colossal. So they can't just be ahead or winning by a bit. They need to be winning by an awful lot. So, yeah, and in the meantime, they are conscious, when I speak to people, Labour people privately, they are conscious that the Conservatives have managed to, steady things at least in terms of how government appears at Westminster. It isn't the kind of rolling chaos that it was for much of last year. Keir Starmer had made a big thing last year of portraying himself as the sort of grown-up of British politics and pointing and drawing a comparison with Liz Truss and with Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak arrives on the stage and has a similar kind of political act. So to that extent, it becomes a bit harder for Keir Starmer as well. Just one little local nugget just to bring you whilst we've been talking as far as Labour's performance is concerned, looking particularly good. We've talked about this already, but looking particularly good in Stoke for them. The gains that they are making there looks like, my maths is right, that they're heading in the direction of taking control.
Well, that would make sense because our Lizzie Glencoe, our colleague on the ground there, told us that the local Conservative leader had already left the building, which normally when it comes to election counts suggests that you've lost and you've gone away. But, you know, who knows? Maybe he was going out to, maybe who knows what he was doing? Maybe he's come back. Who knows? Let's see. But we will hear from Lizzie as soon as we've got any definitive news from Stoke, because that would be quite a symbolic win for Labour, or if they do indeed manage to do that in Stoke, because it's one of those really crucial parts of the country where Brexit was such a divide. Do you think, Peter Kyle, if Labour is making progress in what the jargon says are red wall, but former Labour areas, heavily Brexit, said no to Jeremy Corbyn, do you think you're seeing signs that actually that Brexit divide is fading a bit?
I think we're actually just crossing lots of divides, actually. I think what we've put a lot of effort into is just getting the basics right. We've put an offer to the country which is right where the country wants us to be, centrally. So that means this whole campaign centrally has been about the cost of living crisis and how we can tackle that. It's been about cutting crime. It's been about cutting the waiting lists on the NHS. Then we had a very big regional operation, and then we had a very big local operation. So we've been layering this campaign, getting it right at the centre using Keir, and then right down into communities, and it seems to be working. So you can see us defeating Tories in Plymouth. You can see us doing really well in Stoke. We've just taken the mayoralty in Middlesbrough. Now, that was won 4 years ago with a 60% majority of the percentage of the vote by an independent, and we've just taken that back. So you can see that we're doing well right across the board. We're doing well geographically, north, south, and in the Midlands, and we're also doing well in Leave and Remain, and we're getting these different basics of winning an election right. These are the things we're looking at. We want the overall numbers, of course we do, because when we get hundreds of new councillors, as we are likely to do this morning and tomorrow afternoon, it means we have the ability to serve. That's what we're really in this for serving communities. But then we're also looking to, of course, as a party, for how we take steps forward towards a general election. So we're getting all of these different bits right.
But you say you're getting sort of the basics right. I suppose the basics right, that isn't going to get you to number 10. I mean, are you confident that's enough?
Well, listen to what I've just said. We're getting all of the different constituent parts right, and too often in the past we've got lots of those elements wrong. Geographically, we're getting it right. We're taking seats off the Tories in the south, and don't forget we're doing the southwest at the moment. Tomorrow we'll do a lot of seats across the southeast. We'll be fighting the Greens in Brighton. We'll be fighting the Tories in Crawley. We're even having a good old pop in Dover. And if we make gains in Dover, these are places that the Labour Party hasn't done well since the 90s and early noughties. So we're taking the fight right to the Tories, right across the country. We're doing it with a core central message based on the priorities of the country as a whole. And then we're working very, very well locally as well, tuning and plugging in to those local priorities. We have not had such message discipline. We have not had such energised activists for a very long time, and it's working.
Is message discipline something to be proud of? It basically means that politicians say what they're told to say, doesn't it?
The country expects a party of government and aspiring to government to be a disciplined party. We heard a minute ago from Chris saying that the Tories of Rishi Sunak has steadied the ship. The problem is he's steadied the ship, and it's on the bottom of the ocean floor. I mean, they blew a hole in the economy, they've trashed their reputation, they've trashed Britain's reputation around the world. The ship has sunk, so it's been levelled off right at the bottom. They are about to lose, perhaps, 1,000 seats, 1,000 councillors, on the back of an electoral cycle when it was last fought 4 years ago, when they had the worst ever showing in modern history, and they're still losing 1,000. This is a ship which is on the bottom of the seabed right now. That's where it's stabilised.
Nikki, rock bottom, according to Peter Kyle.
Look, the Labour Party are not doing as well as they should be doing. They haven't taken Hull, they didn't take Worcester. Obviously, they've taken other councils, but they're not doing as well as they should be, particularly if you're considering what Tony Blair did in 1995. They are a long, long way from that.
And
I think, please don't interrupt. You always interrupt me. You're so bad at interrupting me, Peter. It always does it. Is it because I'm a woman? But I think, as I said to you earlier, 13 years of being in power, people are going to want to send us a message, particularly after what's happened in the last year. But I don't accept about the economy. We have gone through a pandemic where we spent hundreds of billions of pounds keeping people in jobs. We have then gone through into a energy crisis, inflation, but it's not just the United Kingdom, it's across the world. If you see what's going on...
There was also something rather different that happened here. What didn't happen in other countries was a market meltdown when a new Prime Minister came in. You can't just say it was the same as happened in other countries. But as you've been talking, we can now confirm that North West Leicestershire is a Conservative loss. You've lost that council there. We were talking to the very upset local Conservative there who was sharing his frustration that national turmoil had done for him and his councillors on the doorstep. Look, the Conservatives down at 12 council seats there, Labour increasing their share by 8, the Conservatives down by 8. Yeah. Now, when you look at a result like that, what goes through your mind?
Oh, well, we heard from the group leader, and it was heartbreaking. And, you know, we will lose, many, many brilliant Conservative councillors. Well, you know, all parties will lose good, hard-working councillors today and into, well, I was going to say tomorrow, but it is tomorrow. But, Laura, from what I was being told on the doorstep, people have been fed up with what was been going on within our party in Parliament.
Councillors, potentially more than 1,000 of them are paying the price because of the antics of your colleagues at Westminster. And I know you spent a long time in local government as well, Nikki, so do you feel...
Well, we lost Westminster Council last year, and I can tell you it's because our voters stayed away. They certainly didn't vote for the Labour Party, and they didn't vote for Lib Dems.
But why are you saying, it sounds like you are saying, that your councillors around the country are paying the price for the turmoil, bad behaviour of some of your colleagues in Westminster?
Well, look, as I've said all night, and as other colleagues have said all night, we know it was going to be a tough night for us. After 13 years in power, of course, and as I said to you earlier, when I was first elected in 2006 and 2010 under Labour governments, I had no issues. It was once I had a Conservative government that people were saying, I'm not going to vote for you this time because I don't like your government. So there's always a national effect on local elections. There's also, you know, local elections you saw in Plymouth. There's a particular reason why we lost Plymouth, to do with the felling of 100 trees. There's reasons why we lost seats in Brentwood to the Lib Dems because of a particular 2 developments. So there are always, it's always a mixture of local issues and then the national picture.
Lord Fox, those local issues for the Liberal Democrats, they often play very well. And we have seen in this campaign that the Lib Dems in local areas have often fought very hard against some things, like fought very hard against lots of housing developments. Whereas nationally, you're very fond of saying that actually the Conservatives have been dreadful because they haven't built enough houses. So are you profiting by double standards?
Well, I think people look at the Conservatives and they don't trust them where it comes to developers. They know that developers are backing the party centrally, and that trust then is reflected locally, and Liberal Democrats quite rightly reflect that trust. You only have to look at what Michael Gove's trying to do with the Levelling Up Bill, which is to take control of things centrally. And if you ask Conservative councillors, 54% of Conservative councillors are against what Michael Gove is doing. So it's not just us. It's the Conservative councillors themselves who don't like what's going on about development and the relationship between developers, local communities and the level of power that people seem to lack when it comes to making those decisions.
Isn't the bigger truth though here, and this is a question for all of you really, the country requires so many more houses than we currently have, and that's going to involve politicians at a national and local level making difficult arguments, because otherwise people are going to struggle to find the housing that they need.
Well, it's also going to involve having proper conversations with communities, with real decisions being made on account of what they say. There is consultation that goes on and
no if they don't
ignored,
like it.
And people see that, and it undervalues every decision because they know, or they believe they know, that other forces are at play when these decisions are being made. The way to deal with it is with people, not over their heads.
All three of you, thank you very much indeed for now. Nikki, we are saying goodbye to you. Thank you very much for coming in. You're going to bed. Are you going to bed now?
Yes.
Tremendous. Well, sleep well. I'm sure you'll be back hard at it tomorrow, because there might be some tricky conversations at Conservative HQ tomorrow once you've had a bit of a sleep, but we appreciate you giving us your time here. The other two, don't go anywhere. We still need you to be with us. Hard work for you ahead. And also remember, if you are that way inclined and you like to look at things on your phone while you're watching TV, there is so much information on the BBC website, all sorts of tips and trends, insights and bits and pieces of information from my colleagues right around the country, analysis from Chris, everything you could possibly want to know about these local elections as they develop through the night. And that's at bbc.co.uk or, of course, on the app on your phone. So head there anytime. Let's now, though, head to Medway. Anna Collinson is there for us now. Anna, it's hours since we talked at the beginning of the night about what might happen there and why it's an important part of the country. There's Medway towns in Kent, not that far from London, but the kind of place currently represented by Conservatives, but where Labour definitely want to chip away. What's been happening?
Yeah, so there's been a bit of movement since we last spoke, Laura. Actually, we've seen the biggest test so far this evening. Twiddle, a seat of two seats in one area, has been taken by the Labour Party. And when that was announced, there were big cheers from the corner of red supporters over there. And that's been a real sort of standout moment so far. But that's seat 5. We've got a total of 59 to get through, so 54 more to go. I mean, as you mentioned, this is a traditionally Tory area, but Labour have very much set their sights on trying to capture it. Keir Starmer has been into Gillingham twice in the past month. The mood here, I would describe from the Conservative Party, is pretty nervous. I asked one candidate how he thought they were doing, and he pulled a face and whispered, badly, pretty badly. Councillor Alan Jarrett, who is the Conservative leader of the Medway Council, he has told the BBC that he believes that Labour will secure a majority tonight. He's basically saying that voters have been let down by the Conservatives nationally, and many of them are staying at home. He also says that recent boundary changes that have happened in Medway have had a negative impact on the Conservatives, that they've broken up key Conservative wards. Labour would argue that actually there was a real imbalance beforehand, and that those boundary changes needed to happen to address that balance. Ultimately, Labour, what I'm sensing is they're feeling hopeful, but anxious, but nervous. There is also fear on their side of apathy, that there is a real sense of people not feeling represented by either party and not turning out. And we've seen that in some of the seats when they've been called out today. Some of the turnouts have been around 20%. Now, we expect low turnout during a local election, but normally around 30 to 40%, so 20% is particularly low. So, as I say, we've got 54 more seats to go, so it's still all to play for, really.
Although, and I know you said there that the leader, I think you said the leader of the Tory group, said that they think they're going to lose it and that Labour will knock them off.
Yes, that's exactly what I said. Alan Jarrett told the BBC just after the announcement just before the announcement involving Twiddle, that he believes that Labour will take the majority this evening. Now, I've spoken to some of the Labour activists and they're being a bit more cautious. They don't want to overstep the mark before they're ready, but Twiddle, that sort of clinching of that first Twiddle seat, or the first 2 Twiddle seats, is a real good sign in their books.
Anna, thank you very much indeed, and I think that is ward name of the night. Twiddle is one there. But Anna, thank you very much indeed, and keep us posted if we've got official confirmation of what the leader of the Labour group is predicting. Politics Live, as it happens, the leader of the group saying we're going to win it, and the activists going, oh, don't quite say that yet, but we'll keep you posted and let you know when we have confirmation of that result there in Medway. Let's go to another important count we've been talking about tonight. Let's zoom up to the northwest. Let's go back to Kevin Fitzpatrick in Bolton. Now, you explained to us, Kevin, earlier why, this is the kind of place where party leaders fall over themselves to turn up, because there are lots of important northwest seats around there, and the council itself, of course, an important one. So what's been happening since we talked last?
Well, it's been a really good night for Labour here and a pretty terrible night for the Conservatives. Better than Labour expected, I think it's fair to say, and worse than the Conservatives. We've still got some results coming in, but latest is that it's 8 Labour gains tonight. 6 of those have come directly from the Conservatives. Also, before I was telling you that the smaller hyper-local parties are a big influence around here. Labour's taken a couple from one of those, but one of those smaller independents has taken another seat from the Conservatives. So the Conservatives are well down, Labour are well up. Coming into this election, we'd had a couple of years since 2019 of the Conservatives running a minority administration, a coalition of those smaller parties. It looks like Labour will certainly now be the largest party, still waiting to see whether they can end up gaining a majority. If they do end up the largest party, it's no guarantee they would then be able to form a minority administration, because so many of those hyper-local parties were actually set up, came into creation in opposition to the existing Labour Council as it was then. So it could be that the Conservatives, even with a smaller number of councillors, are able to hang on and continue to lead this council. But either way, it's a pretty grim night for them, and Labour are cock-a-hoop down there with still more results to come in.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin, for bringing us that, and keep us posted when there's confirmation of any more results as they come through. Exactly the kind of place, Bolton, there in the northwest of England, where Labour wanted to show progress. They are showing progress, and they really did show progress and have done so far in Stoke, from where we can be joined by the former MP, Ruth Smeeth. Now, Baroness Anderson, you look absolutely overjoyed, completely different to when I think we perhaps last talked on an election programme. You can almost contain your glee. Tell us what's on your mind. You look delighted.
We've just taken control of the council. This is a Labour gain. This is a Labour council in Stoke-on-Trent for the first time in 8 years. This is Labour back as a political force in my city. I am truly delighted.
Why do you think it happened?
Look, I think what we've seen today is that the Conservative Party have been losing votes in every ward. We've seen the city independents and the local independent parties completely collapse, and people have come home to the Labour Party. I think that the Conservatives are going to have to reflect on what they do in places like Stoke. I think that the electorate are sending them a clear message, but for us, there's still a huge amount of work to do to make sure that we can win at the general election and that we take our former seats back. But this is an incredible stepping stone. And from tomorrow, my city is red.
Do you think, Baroness Anderson, this means that Brexit as a sort of political force that shoved people to vote one way or the other is receding? Because that was absolutely a really strong factor previously when Labour was so damaged in Stoke, because you had a strong Leave vote and then Labour MPs who found that you were sort of stuck in the middle in a way. Do you think that's fading?
I think that some parts of that are fading, but I think 4 years ago we had Jeremy Corbyn, now we've got Keir Starmer. I think Brexit and the world's moved on. We've seen COVID, we've seen the cost of living crisis, and people are genuinely fearful in my city of how they're meant to pay their bills, and they've seen nothing but car parks being built with the levelling up money. There's been no real investment from the Conservative Party in Stoke-on-Trent. It's been smokes and mirrors. They've been betrayed. They were promised the world, and actually what the Conservative Party delivered them was literal car parks that no one can afford to use, and there's nowhere to go if you do park in them. So what we've got to see going forward, and what the Labour Party will be offering, is hope for my city, is actual aspiration for the people that live here and investment in them. And tonight is the first stepping stone to take back our city.
I'm sure you've been on the doors a lot in this campaign though, Baroness. Do you think that people have been protesting against the Conservatives or going enthusiastically to you?
Look, we've still got some way to go to convince people, and I'm not underestimating the scale of the challenge. We had an awful night. Last time I was in this room 4 years ago, I think you and I had a very different type of conversation. But the Conservative Party have betrayed them. That's what we're getting on the doors. And for the first time, they're prepared to have conversations with us about what the Labour Party can offer. And they've given us their trust in this election. We'll need to build on it to make sure that we can at the next stage for the general election.
Baroness Anderson, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure you'll go on to many celebrations. We can now officially confirm, as she said, but by our numbers we can confirm that Labour has gained Stoke-on-Trent. There are still 14 seats left to declare, but they've gained the council, 23 seats to them, 6 to the Conservatives. Let's look at the change. Labour gaining 10 seats with still 14 to go. The Tories down 1. But what's interesting here, the independents, which also includes other smaller parties, independents down 9. So you're seeing there the Labour gaining 10, Conservatives losing 1, but independents and other parties dropping by 9 seats. Peter Carroll, let's just get some quick reaction to you from that result. But I must also introduce Hugh Merriman, the Transport Minister. You're very welcome to the studio. Thanks for coming in. Quick reaction to the Stoke result, Peter.
Oh, I'm just completely over the moon. Ruth and I came into Parliament at the same election in 2015, and we're very good friends. And I was very, very sad, as all of us in the Labour Party were, when people in Stoke turned their backs on us in 2019. It was a really difficult thing for us to cope with. We worked really, really hard to listen to people in Stoke and in Teesside and in other parts of the country where we lost the trust of voters. We've worked really hard to listen to what the concerns were and to address them. And what you're seeing tonight is the fruition of a lot of energy we've put in right across the country, listening, responding, acting, and actually putting our money where our mouth is.
Chris, you were talking at the beginning of the night about the symbolism of somewhere like Stoke, and there it is, you know, back in Labour hands.
Yeah, I mean, I think quite strikingly, one of the most sort of striking images of the night so far was a picture that we showed around about an hour ago, before that result in Stoke was 100% confirmed, but we were talking to it, where we saw Baroness Anderson, who you were just talking to there, and Gareth Smith, both former Labour MPs in the city, embracing some of the successful Labour councillors, and you get that sense in pictorial terms of what we've been talking about all night, about how parties seek to rebuild in local government in the hope that that gives them a launch pad for making gains come a general election. And when you look at the result there in Stoke, and then you look at what looks like the beginnings of results coming from Medway, from your earlier conversation with Anna Collinson there, these both crucial areas in terms of swing constituencies at a parliamentary level. Those Medway towns, so many of them won by Labour during Labour's time in national government, lost by Labour as they came out of national government in 2010. The Conservatives in many of those have built up considerable majorities. But if Labour are heading towards a victory in Medway, again, a point in a patch where they need to be making gains, where it looks like they are making gains. But equally, I was struck by Baroness Anderson's answer to your question about the extent to which this is a huge enthusiasm for Labour or not quite that. And there was a caveat there, I thought, from her. And I think that will be a question that will be put again and again, I suspect, over the next, 12, 14 hours, however many it is,
sure
in terms of measuring how much in the round this is about real disillusion with the Conservatives versus huge enthusiasm or not for Labour.
And we should underline, of course, that although we do have quite a lot of information here now, certainly enough to be assessing it and discussing it with our guests around the country and our politicians here in the studio, there are still 189 councils to go out of a total of 230. So there's still plenty more information to come before any kind of final assessments, if there is such a thing in politics, can be made about this set of council elections. But let's ponder some of that for a few minutes with James Johnson, who is a pollster. He worked for Theresa May. He saw the opportunity of her numbers to begin with, and I think the horror of her numbers towards the end. James, thank you very much for joining us tonight. From your scribblings and your calculator and your sense of what we're seeing so far, what does it add up to?
Well, I think there's no doubt that this is a good night for Labour. On the one hand, they are not sort of, completely storming it with the Conservatives. If you remember those projections that we've had over the last few weeks and months of Labour getting 100, 200, 300 seat majorities if there were a general election, I think it's pretty clear that's not happening. But it is a good result for Labour, and they clearly are headed towards quite a good night. It's not that 90s style victory, but it is a question of whether it's going to be good or very good for them. And the key number to watch there will be, well, all eyes on John Curtice, because that national equivalent, that projected national share, if Labour are at 10 points or more ahead on that, then I think that'll be a very good night for them indeed.
And just to remind viewers, if they didn't hear Sir John's explanation a bit earlier on, the projected national share is when all the numbers from today go into some kind of complicated algorithm and supercomputer, no doubt, and give us a picture of what the national share would be had everybody in the UK been voting today. It's not a projection of what will actually happen in the general election, but it is a very, very important snapshot that the parties do look at very, very carefully. What about the Conservatives, James? What do you think is going on here? Rishi Sunak has had 7 months in office. He may have slowed the decline, according to lots of MPs, when you talk to them about what's going on, and that would be the sort of view of many people in Westminster. But when you look at the numbers that we're seeing emerging, is that really the case?
Well, I think certainly if these elections had happened 6 months ago before Rishi Sunak took power, they would be a lot worse than they are tonight. He's almost halved that polling lead that Labour was given by a combination of Boris Johnson's parties and Liz Truss's mini budget. So, look, I think there is a sense that he has steadied the ship. These are obviously not going to be great results for the Conservatives. I think that's pretty clear. I think the big question, though, is not so much trying to read in positives to the Conservative position tonight, but actually to ask, can they turn it around? There's a time before, in 1990, when Labour were 11 points ahead on that projected national share number you just explained. And obviously 2 years later, the Conservatives managed to win an election. So that's the question now. And if we did a poll last year, and I went on your show about this time of the night last year, and said that I didn't think Boris Johnson could necessarily turn it around. When we did a poll last year about why people voted in those local elections, why they didn't vote for the Conservatives, one of the words that popped up in our word cloud was Boris. We don't see that level of personal vote to this tonight, whether it's opprobrium towards Rishi Sunak or positivity towards Keir Starmer. These are almost the elections where, almost despite the existence of Rishi Sunak and despite the existence of Keir Starmer, come a general election, when it's those two people in the front of people's minds about who will be the next Prime Minister, things may well look very different indeed.
James, thank you so much indeed. It's great to have you. I just noticed you were live with us from New York. I think that might be a first for a English
not so late at night
council.
for me.
Yeah, I think that's a first for a local election programme, but we're very grateful to you for giving us your time. And it is always so interesting to think about the historical comparisons, which are both useful, but also can lead you down the wrong path if you are not also remembering that what happens in elections is, of course, a snapshot of what is happening exactly at that moment. And I just want to give you something interesting that's happening right at the moment in North Norfolk. Lovely part of the world, Cromer, Sheringham, that bit of the coast. Let's look at what's happening to the Conservatives here. Now, they're still counting. The Liberal Democrats have 16 seats so far. The Tories have 9. But look at this. We haven't seen this much tonight. The Conservatives have gained 7 seats, and the Liberal Democrats have lost 6. Now, there are still 12 to declare, so in the end, that might flip. But that's something interesting going on in North Norfolk, where the Conservatives might have reasons to have a smile. But let's see what happens. It's a Lib Dem council at the moment. Let's look, though, at Hertsmere. Now, that's leafy, affluent Elstree, Hertfordshire, not far from London, lots of commuters. They are still counting there, but some more grim news for the Conservatives. You can see 14 seats for them so far, 11 for Labour. But look, Conservatives losing 10 seats. And that's the part of the world, commuter belt around London, that sort of donut, as it's sometimes called, where the Conservatives may well, looking at that kind of result, be pretty nervous about what else might be coming down the track. But they are still counting there. We don't have a final result. And as I was saying before, there are still a lot of councils. The majority of councils are still to come. So at this point, 4:45. Rita, give us a primer on what we should expect tomorrow.
I'll do that, Laura. I'm going to start you off with the councils that we have been watching overnight. Just to update you, really, we heard about Stoke-on-Trent, a Labour gain just in the last few minutes. Plymouth happened earlier in the evening. The Lib Dems have held on to Cotswold and Labour has held on to Bassetlaw. But we know, of course, that the Conservatives have lost control of Brentwood, North West Leicestershire and Tamworth. Now, although this screen has changed a lot from right at the beginning of the evening, what you will notice is that not that many councils have changed hands. And that is partly because most of these councils were voting in thirds. It was only a third of the seats that were up. And that makes it harder for control to change. But that is different for the councils to watch on Friday. We are Friday, the councils that are counting during the day on Friday, because let me take you through some of them. Under the Conservative-controlled councils, North Warwickshire, for example, it's a really interesting area because the Conservatives have an 18,000 majority in the House of Commons in North Warwickshire, but they are under threat from Labour at council level. And that is true of the following 4 councils: Airwash in Derbyshire, Dover, Swindon, where Keir Starmer launched his local election campaign, Labour's local election campaign, Amber Valley, also in Derbyshire. All of these are under threat from Labour. And the following 3, Stratford-on-Avon, East Cambridgeshire and West Berkshire, well, the Conservatives are there under threat from the Liberal Democrats. So it could be that we will see a lot more churn in the coming hours during the day on Friday. In the Labour column, Crawley at the top is a super marginal. Labour's only got a majority of 2 seats. And at the general election in 2019, Crawley went Conservative. So that is a council where Labour is really going to want to hang on and also consolidate its support. But the Conservatives will be bringing the fight to them. Lots of other interesting councils in the Labour column, including Leeds, where there are 2 general election target seats for the Labour Party. So Labour will, of course, want to hang on to the council, consolidate its support with a view to perhaps targeting and gaining those seats at a general election. Under the Lib Dem column, the party will be looking to build its support in all of these areas in the south, and particularly you can see there are councils that are surrounding the capital, so Woking in Surrey, Mole Valley in Surrey, Three Rivers in Hertfordshire and also Watford. And in the hung column here, well, really all these councils from Derby right the way through to Mansfield, the Labour Party is wanting to really take the fight there and is looking to take control of all of these councils. And we know that Labour is having a good night. Is it possible that we'll see quite a few of these councils changing hands? And before we end, a word about Mid Suffolk and Brighton and Hove, because the Greens, who are having a good night of it, latest analysis shows that they are on a par with their performance in 2019, where they performed very strongly. Mid Suffolk is their strongest hope of the first council that they might be able to gain outright. So we'll be watching Mid Suffolk and also Brighton and Hove, where the Greens are leading a minority administration. So plenty of excitement for those of you who aren't sated with the overnight. Lots to watch.
Thank you, Reeta. It's never enough, never enough. Let's get then into those green contests. Reeta was talking about 2 important ones, Brighton and Hove, where the Greens are trying to keep their minority control of the local authority there on the south coast, and then Mid Suffolk on the other part of the southeast, north a bit and east a bit, where they are hopeful of becoming the majority holders of the council, which would be a first for them, as we were hearing earlier from Carla Denyer. Her co-leader, Adrian Ramsey, I'm pleased to say, is with us down the line. He can join us now. Now, as Reeta was saying, so far you appear to be pretty much matching your record performance from 2019 in the keywords that we're collecting data for. But I just want to ask you about something we've been picking up things about, collaboration with the other parties. Now, it might not be formal, but it definitely has been happening in some places. In Mid Suffolk, Labour's not running a full slate of candidates. So if you make the kind of progress that you want, how much of it will be down to those informal arrangements with other parties?
Well, good morning, Laura. And as you say, we are on track for further gains on top of that record breakthrough we saw 4 years ago in 2019, where we were having green gains right across the country in rural and urban areas alike, and from Labour and from the Conservatives. And we are already seeing, as you say, that pattern not only repeated, but growing on it, as we expect to see continue to happen throughout the day. At a local level, Greens are gaining support from all the other parties. And yes, there's places like Mid-Suffolk where you hardly see any Labour or Lib Dem presence on the ground, but that's really a reflection of the strength of those parties in that area. And in Mid-Suffolk, as in other places like North Herefordshire, there are many wards where, if it wasn't for the Greens, the Conservatives would be going unchallenged, and Greens are winning seats from Conservatives in ever greater numbers, as I think we'll see in many parts of the country this time. And of course, where we've got big concentrations of those gains, like in Herefordshire, like in Suffolk, that sets us up very well for challenging for those parliamentary seats when it comes to the general election.
But do you deny, though, that sometimes you are taking seats because the other parties have stood back, because there is this notion of a sort of progressive coalition, which some people in your party and the other smaller parties do want?
Well, when Greens get elected onto councils, we do believe in a collaborative approach to politics, and there's many councils around the country that are in no overall control, and where Greens work collaboratively with other parties to make a real difference for their communities. And I think that's what people want from their politicians, is for parties to come together on issues where they agree, but also be willing to challenge and stand up for their communities where they disagree. So Greens do believe in a collaborative, modern form of politics, but we also have something very different to offer to the electorate. Greens work incredibly hard in their local communities, bring a fresh voice from the tired Westminster parties, and people are voting for fairer, greener communities in ever greater numbers because they see the policies that we're offering locally, whether that's on housing, on planning, on transport, are going to make a real difference to their everyday lives in their local communities.
But we heard earlier from a Conservative councillor who said he'd lost his seat because Labour and the Lib Dems stood back so that the Greens had a proper go of beating them. So you're reliant on other parties clearing the way for you.
That you could ask that question of any party under the voting system we have, where it's first past the post. Inevitably, parties will concentrate their resources in some areas more than others because you have to get the most votes in any one ward in order to win. All parties do that under the voting system that we have. And what we're seeing is increasing numbers of wards and councils around the country where the Greens are winning first place, often by some really big majorities, as people are choosing positively to vote for Greens. And you have to remember that, as you say, this isn't a one-off by any means. We've had Green councillors around the country for many years, many decades in some areas, and over the last 4 years the number of places with Green councillors has grown. And what you see repeatedly around the country where we make that breakthrough is people really like what they see with having a Green voice on the council and for their community, and then vote for Green councillors in ever greater numbers. So this time, for example, where we've seen in places like Worcester, where we topped the poll across the whole council area, we made 4 gains, 3 gains in South Tyneside. People have liked what they've seen with Green councillors and are voting for it in ever greater numbers.
Adrian Ramsey, co-leader of the Greens. Thank you very much, Steve, for giving us your time. Well, unbelievably, it's nearly 5 to 5. Time has been whizzing by because there's been so much interesting to talk about. Let's talk to our panel as we run up to the news. Firstly to you, Lord Fox, it was really interesting hearing Adrian Ramsey there talk about these. I think he doesn't want to admit that there's pacts happening on the ground. Now, whether they're formal or not, we heard it from Worcester, and we heard it from the ground that the Lib Dems and Labour stood back in order that the Greens could beat him in Worcester. The Greens, we know, from hearing from the ground from our colleagues around the country that there have been areas where people have stood back. Now, is that something that the Lib Dems should do on a national level?
Before I answer that, can I just put Rita on a warning to get her yellow highlighter out, because we've held Hinckley and Bosworth, and we've held Bath and North East Somerset, which I remind you covers the Rees-Mogg territory. So more yellow required shortly. I was fighting in Windsor this morning, my ward, which I've been delivering in Liberal Democrat manner. There were Liberal Democrat candidates, there were Green candidates. We will win that ward, and it will cease to be a Conservative ward. And we're seeing swings of 26% and more across Windsor. That is how the election process works in most seats across the country. Everybody feels their candidates, and the voters decide who to vote for. And I'm kind of old-fashioned, and that's the sort of thing that I prefer.
Is there a case, though, for some form of progressive alliance? I mean, there is always a lot of chatter about this, and there are some people in Westminster who would like it to happen, think it makes sense.
There may well be. But I think when you're fighting on the ground, when you're out there, I think voters need to be given the information. The information needs to be correct, exact, and not exaggerated. And they need to make the decisions themselves. I think they're quite capable of working out what they want. And they're quite capable. Voters are smart. And voters can choose who they want to beat the people that they want to beat. And I think that's the way you go about it.
There isn't a full slate of candidates from all the parties, can there? That's the point.
Well, I think that's what I just said.
Hugh Merriman, Transport Minister, welcome.
Thank you.
It's not a good night at all for your party. We've seen Stoke in the last few minutes, beaming smiles from Labour there. You can't afford to lose that kind of seat, can you?
Difficult night, and it may get more difficult as the hours progress. I mean, I do note, looking at the data, that I think we lost 1 seat in Stoke, and the other 9 were formerly independents, may have gone back to Labour. So it's important to actually look at the data as well. But obviously that's a disappointment. We want to hold our councils, and I'm obviously really sorry, having been a Conservative district councillor in the past myself, for all of my colleagues who will not succeed this evening. I'm just coming back to the point that was made on PACs. I think Peter will know as well that there was a pact between the Lib Dems and the Greens in Lewis and Brighton, as I recall, the last election, where I think there wasn't a standing. I'm pretty sure that was right. So we have seen it before. And what I tend to find is that in my patch, you tend to find that there's a sort of anti-house building campaign that goes on. It tends to either be the sort of beneficiary of Greens or Liberal Democrats. So it does tend to be a sort of mid-term protest to some of the policies that we're trying to seek to deliver, and maybe that sort of there isn't enough warmth for the Labour Party. So
you raise housing there, though, and actually we've heard from counts around the country that voters have raised housing, and voters have raised their frustrations with housing, and there are people in your party who might fall under that anti-house building category that you've just mentioned. And for many people voting, that may well have been one of the issues they've looked at and thought, you know what, in 13 years, I've heard Conservative politicians say again and again, we need to build more houses, and I cannot afford to buy a house. And your party, your Prime Minister, dropped the targets recently that was meant to make that happen.
yeah, it's interesting because I welcomed Rishi Sunak to my constituency during the leadership process, and we talked about housing.
Part of his campaign.
Yeah, and we talked about housing actually with the leader of our council, and you know, we were sort of putting forward proposals where there would be, you know, for council areas where you've already granted planning applications, but those have not turned into housing, then that would actually be a bar towards more planning applications being made. And I think we were interested in some sort of radical reform. Some of it is making its way through in terms of legislation. I think the most important part is to not force targets onto local areas, but to actually have a sort of bottom-up approach. That's very much Michael Gove's plan, and I look at it through my own brief with railways. We're working with the department to say, right, where are the railways going? That's where the house building should go, and vice versa. So I think that's a sort of smart government that the electors expect from us, because it's then joined up, and we have got more to deliver on that front. I readily admit that.
And what do you have to change then? If this is the scale of defeat that we think it might be based on the current numbers, what needs to change?
Well, this obviously is the first opportunity the electorate have had to actually give their view on what's been going on over a period of time. And we have obviously made our change. We have a change in leader and prime minister.
And it looks like you don't like it very much.
Well, I think we expected the public to actually take out their frustrations on what happened last year. We have already pivoted and turned. And when I was talking to my constituents on the doorsteps yesterday, they were talking about older news, about former prime ministers, but saying your current leader seems to have what it takes. He seems to be turning things around for us. But this is the opportunity for the electorate to give their verdict on where we've been previously, and we understand that.
So this is Boris Johnson and Liz Truss's fault then? That's what's coming through?
Well, certainly on the doorsteps, the feedback I got was that we are in a better place. The polls show that as well. People are reacting in a more positive way towards Rishi Sunak. I think importantly, they respect the way that he manages the country and the economy as a result through that. And I think, you know, as far as I'm concerned, we're in the process now of trying to persuade the electorate that we will turn matters around, we will deliver. But it's fair to say that until we've delivered on the sort of 5 key pledges the Prime Minister's made, we know the electorate are not going to listen as intently to us until that time. So we've got to prove to them. We have to prove to them that we can deliver what they want us to deliver, and only then will they then listen to us and give us the opportunity to go even further. And we know that, and we're humble about it. And that's why I'm sorry about the losses, because they are in the backdrop of what's occurred before.
OK, well, we will have plenty more from you shortly, but we're going to go to the news in a second. But before we go to hear the headlines from Lutsmi, I want to show you our tallies, where they are, our big numbers, and the numbers are racking up now as we head towards our last hour together on this programme. You can see Labour have gained 78 councillors, 78 councils, that would be quite something. The Conservatives have lost 107, the Liberal Democrats have gained 30, and the Greens, we were just hearing from, have gained a dozen so far. A lot to come as the headlines of this first cycle of counting of the elections of 2023 comes to a conclusion. The first cycle, plenty more to come tomorrow, of course. Let's head now, though, to the news with Lutsmi Gopal.
Laura, thank you. Hello, here's your BBC News summary. Labour and the Liberal Democrats have been taking council seats from the Conservatives in England's local elections. Labour have taken control of Plymouth and Stoke-on-Trent, two of their top targets. They've also replaced the Conservatives as the largest party in Hartlepool, although the authority remains under no overall control. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake has more.
Celebration in Stoke-on-Trent. Seat by seat, councillors are finding out their fate. Here, it's Labour that are making gains. Ballots are being counted in some of the 200 or so towns, cities and rural areas across England where voters have had their say on who should run local services. The Tories have had a tough night, hoping to limit their losses, but they've seen control of several councils slip away. Brentwood in Essex was an early loss for the Conservatives here and elsewhere. It's the Lib Dems who are cheering the loudest.
Fantastic result for the Liberal Democrats in one of the safest Tory seats in the country. We've gained 3 seats. We're now up to 17 seats, and the council moves into an overall control. And it's a time of change in Brentwood, and we're really delighted. It's fantastic news.
Labour have taken significant steps forward, gaining dozens of seats from the Conservatives and winning control of Plymouth Council. The city's Tory MP accepted his party was being punished.
Look, it's been a really terrible night for us here in Plymouth. I think there's a number of factors at play. I think locally it's been very difficult. The Conservative group here has been through a very difficult time. We've seen that reflected on the doors in the campaign, and we've seen that reflected in the results tonight, but you know, we take it on the chin.
In a first for elections in England, photo ID was required at polling stations, which left some unable to vote, but it's too soon to say what impact the change has had. Only around a quarter of the councils holding elections are counting votes overnight, so early results won't give anything like the full picture. But in the hours ahead, these local elections will be closely watched as a crucial test of the national political picture. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
And of course, all the local results will be available online. To find out who won in your local area, you can use our postcode checker, available on the BBC News website and on our app. In other news, in Serbia, a gunman has killed at least 8 people in the country's second mass shooting in as many days. Several other people were injured in the incident near Ladnovac, a town about 60 kilometres south of the capital, Belgrade. Police have set up checkpoints as they search for the shooter. Ukraine's Air Force has shot down one of its own drones, which it says had lost control above central Kyiv. There were explosions yesterday evening as air defence tried to shoot it down in an area near the president's office. The Air Force later admitted it was Ukrainian and was destroyed to avoid what it called undesirable circumstances. Members of the biggest rail workers union, the RMT, have voted to renew its mandate for taking strike action. It's the third such vote in a dispute over pay and conditions, which began last year. It raises the prospect of strikes continuing until nearly the end of this year. A US court has ruled that the singer Ed Sheeran did not copy Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On when composing Thinking Out Loud. The British musician had denied stealing elements of the song for his 2014 worldwide hit. Heirs of Marvin Gaye's co-writer argued that Sheeran, Warner Music Group and Sony Music Publishing owed them money for copyright infringement. Sheeran's legal team had argued that the melodies are different and the elements used in both songs are common in pop music. We will be back in an hour with the latest news updates, but for now, it's back to our special election night coverage with Laura. And just to remind you, to see who won in your local area, you can use our postcode checker, which is available on the BBC News website and on our app.
And welcome back to Election 2023, the BBC News coverage of 230 council elections that took place in England, when millions of people had the chance to go out and cast their vote. The first vote of its kind on Rishi Sunak in his time in office. So let's look at what's happened so far. Well, not good news for the Prime Minister. He's 124 seats down. You can see, the numbers spinning through, 126. Changing as we watch. Labour gaining 83 seats. We've seen plenty of Labour smiles around the country tonight. And the Liberal Democrats also very pleased with what they have seen so far. Up 34, taking gains in places they thought they would do well, but also doing better in some parts of the country where they were fighting than they might have expected, and hopeful of making more gains. And to summarise at this stage, where we can make some assessments, not firm conclusions, but some assessments, it looks so far like a very, very difficult night for the Conservatives, potentially losing more than 1,000 council seats, which would be a poor local election performance, perhaps worse than Theresa May's dark days at the end of her premiership. A step forward for Keir Starmer's Labour Party, with gains in the kinds of parts of the country where they want to see them, but perhaps not a significant leap towards power that would have silenced perhaps some of those who grumble in his party that he's not quite radical enough. And for the Liberal Democrats so far, well, a pretty healthy set of numbers at this stage. But we should remember there are still the majority of results to come in, so it's important not to draw concrete, firm conclusions, but we can talk about the assessments that we can make so far. Two final reminders. Elections are not happening everywhere in the country. There are none in Scotland, none in Wales, not happening in Northern Ireland until a couple of weeks' time. And the last time these seats were all fought was in 2019. In May 2019, under Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn and Vince Cable. A completely different political universe. But let's pick up on one of the things that has happened tonight. Now, we've talked quite a bit about Medway Council. We've been there on the ground hearing about what's going on. It looks like Labour is going to take that from the Conservatives. That, I think, is better than they'd expected. They were hoping for gains, but it sounds like they are actually going to take the council. And we can talk to Alan Jarrett, who is the Conservative leader of Medway Council, perhaps the outgoing leader. Mr. Jarrett, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Are you sure now of the result?
Yes, pretty sure, Laura, because although we haven't had many seats declared, walls declared, it's quite obvious from the counting that Labour will form the next administration, and we will bring to the end of 23 years of Conservative administration in Medway, which obviously we're disappointed about and sad about.
Why do you think that's happened?
Well, I think there's two factors at play. We've had extensive boundary changes here, and what we've seen is where there's been major boundary changes, Labour has been the beneficiary of virtually all of those. And of course, there's a relative unpopularity of some of the government decisions. I think those two things have created a perfect storm here in Medway, and hence where we're going to be.
Which of those decisions have been unpopular for your residents?
Certainly the housing targets that we've seen centrally imposed has not played well. We've had unrealistic and excessive housing targets, and that has been certainly in parts of Medway the major factor.
And in terms of other things on Rishi Sunak's list, you know, he came in trying to calm things down, trying to turn things around. But from voters that you spoke to through the course of the campaign, you said they're frustrated about housing targets being imposed on the area. But what else have they made of Rishi Sunak's effort to calm things down?
1726.
You can just hear a huge cheer. I don't know if that's the overall result being confirmed, Mr. Jarrett, or if it's just another ward being announced. And another cheer, we're just watching, well, we're just listening to what's happening at Medway Council.
Gareth Richard Mighton, Labour and Cooperative Party 1577.
So while we wait for the cheers to subside, it sounds very much like Labour has taken control of Medway Council. At least that's the impression we are getting, and that's the prediction of Alan Jarrett, who we can probably hear a bit better now. I mean, Rishi Sunak's supporters, the minister here in the studio, would say, look, he's turned things around, he's stopped the rot, people just need a bit more time to understand what he's trying to do. Do you feel optimistic that that can happen?
Rupert David Fearon-Turpin, Local Conservatives 128.
Sorry, Laura.
Perhaps we might come back to you in a second or two. Shall we do that? I'm just going to show you something that's happened in Hertsmere Council. Now, this is another Hertfordshire council and another one that the Conservatives have lost. 2 seats still to declare, but the Conservatives on 15, Labour on 13, the Liberal Democrats on 9. Let's look at why they have lost. 6 new seats for Labour, 6 new seats for the Liberal Democrats, and the Conservatives losing 12 seats. Now, Hertsmere, again, that is one of the parts of the country, commuter belt, people able to get in and out of London relatively easily, relatively affluent. That also is the seat of Oliver Dowden, who is the Deputy Prime Minister. It's the council of the local authority area of the second most senior Conservative in the land now. The Conservatives have held that council since 1999. They had a big majority and they might have expected to make some losses, but they would have not have been expecting to lose that council. So we'll pick up on Hertsmere perhaps in a few minutes. Let's just see if the cheers have subsided at Medway Council for the Labour Party and see if we can talk again to Alan Jarrett. Alan, thank you for bearing with us and you're managing to look cheerful in these circumstances. We've just heard another council go, Hertsmere in Hertfordshire, along with yours, you expect in Medway, Plymouth going as well, Stoke going as well. How bad do you think this suggests things are for your party?
Well, Laura, clearly it's not. Clearly it's not great, isn't it? Very disappointed. Very disappointed for the people of Medway, and we will have to see how that plays out over the next year, 18 months, as we move towards a general election.
What do you think it will mean, though, for those Conservative MPs in your part of the world? I think there are 3 Tory MPs along Medway, Tracy Crouch, former Sports Minister, Raymond Chishti we're talking to earlier, and Kelly Tolhurst, also a member of the government. Do you think their seats are now at risk because of that shift away from you?
Well, you see, the problem is, Laura, they have big majorities and very popular. But of course, what we have is the activists on the ground, the elected councillors, are the bedrock of the support around which the campaigns are built. And any diminution of local representation has a negative effect. So we will continue to work hard to support the MPs and expect them to continue to support us, but it's not the best grounding, is it, Laura, for the general election to come?
Do you think that Rishi Sunak has a chance of turning it round?
Neil Davis being the returning officer of the election.
Yes, obviously a chance, but it's looking a bit gloomy this evening, isn't it? We've got to stay positive, got to stay cheerful as we can, and continue to work hard to represent the people that have elected us, and do all we can for them.
Okay, Alan Jarrett, thank you very much indeed for sharing our thoughts. Well, you've got Labour activists cheering behind you. It's good of you to give us your time. Hugh Merriman, I mean, when you hear someone like that, clearly who's given a huge amount to your party, given a huge amount to the public, but he's laying it on the mess that there's been at Westminster. Do you feel embarrassed?
I feel really sorry for Alan and his colleagues. They've held Medway for some time, and as he said, there's been a concerted campaign, particularly around house building. You can probably see that around Hertsmere as well. It's very difficult because as a government, we have to deliver the homes that people need, and I feel really passionate about that, and every incoming government will have to have that policy. But of course, people don't necessarily want them in their area, and I think that's where there's been a lot of pushback and we've suffered. But I do believe it's the right thing to do to build homes that people
So what,
need.
you're blaming NIMBYs for you losing seats?
No, I'm not at all, actually. I said earlier to you that we have to reflect on what we have delivered in terms of performance over last year. That should be our driving force to turn things around and make it better, that we do understand what's happened, that we do understand that the voters have their first opportunity to judge us, and they're not judging us particularly well. So that should be our motivating force, to be humble about it, to turn it round, to show that we're listening. But any government will have difficult choices, and building the homes that people need, particularly young people, to give them the same chance that older people have, like me, or had, that's so important if we're to actually continue to sort of ensure that younger voters support us as well. So I do feel for councillors who've lost their seats. I've been a district councillor. I know how important the role is. And I feel really sorry for what's happened. And if it's happened because of government decisions, then I feel even more sorry for those people.
I note there you use the word reflect. And reflect is often political code for saying, yeah, maybe we've got some things wrong.
I think we did get things wrong last year. I mean, I was looking at John Redwood's encouragement in terms of what we should do. And actually, when we did that...
Well, let's show that to people. I was just about to do that, but you've catched it off my screen.
I've seen things like that from him before.
Well, so John Redwood, who of course is a long-serving Conservative MP on the right of the party economically, a minister some time ago, he's written on social media, if the Prime Minister wants to win back lost Conservative voters, he should try offering some Conservative policies. Cut taxes, get better value for state spending and go for growth. Now, you are a Conservative government with the highest tax burden that people are having to pay for many, 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 many years. By some measure, it's sort of the highest it's ever been, not in wartime. There's clearly frustration on the Conservative benches about that, we know that. But maybe that's also what some people around the country are looking at and thinking, I'm not having a great time and I'm blaming you for it.
Well, I would just reflect that we did try some of those policies when Liz Truss came in, and it didn't end well because the markets were spooked. Because if you look at the total level of our borrowing and our debt, it's too high and we can't afford that. And again, actually, the burden falls on the youngest, who I've just talked about in terms of needing homes as well. So,
but you know, lots of your colleagues would love to see a tax cut, an income tax cut, perhaps of 1 or 2 pence, maybe not the kind of hugely radical thing that Liz Truss tried to do at speed. Do you think you might end up having to do that? We know Rishi Sunak wants to do it before the election.
We would love to do that. We've always been the party of cutting taxes, but we've also been the party that's proclaimed responsible financial management. And at this time, when we are having to spend money, the COVID years where we had to inject huge amounts of support in, energy support still going on, we have to make choices. And the choices are either to support people in these challenging times or to reduce taxation. We hope that once we're over the problem with energy spikes, for example, then we can reduce taxes. But you can only do that if you manage the economy sensibly. And we've seen the sort of dash for change last year, and we saw what happened to the markets. And when the Conservative Party loses the markets, then we'll end up losing the electorate. And so I'm conscious that the decisions we're making now, and of course we test those with the people. The 5 priorities the Prime Minister has are the people's priorities, and we've got to deliver on those. If we do, people start listening to us again, and that's where I hope that they'll trust us again, and we'll be able to deliver into the future.
Peter, what do you make of all of that?
Well, I think it's quite extraordinary because what we see is an unstable government. We talk about planning. We've had 3 planning bills in the last 5 years. Hugh says that he wants a bottom-up approach to planning. Well, we've had a bottom-up approach. We've had a top-down approach. Before the top-down approach, we had a bottom-up approach because all the different bills take different approaches. We've had targets and then we've had the targets dropped. So you understand that this complete change, and that's just planning. Then we've had the hole blown in our economy by the mini-budget last year, for which the public have not forgiven. Because Hugh references the reputation that the Tories once had, or at times have claimed to have, for responsible governing of our finances. Well, that's just shot to pieces at the moment. So whether it's planning, whether it's the economy, whether it's running our public services with 7.5 million people waiting for treatment on the NHS, these are all things that touch people's lives in a meaningful way. So right through this evening, you have seen the 2 words, the 2 phrases, bad night for the Tories, a good night for Labour, whether that's in Stoke, whether that's up in Hartlepool, whether that's in Teesside, right down through to Plymouth. Tomorrow we're going to get through down to Dover and see what's happening in Brighton and Hove and Crawley and the rest of the southeast. And the reason is that we have a credible alternative because there is lots of parties out there that are standing. It doesn't have to be coming back to Labour. They could be going to lots of other parties, but the majority are coming back to Labour as a credible alternative, and that's why we're getting it right in the south, in the north, in Leave areas, in Remain areas. We are uniting our country once again based on a positive vision for a better Britain going forward. That brings hope to people, and that's what people want.
But what we must also remind viewers, the speed of Tory losses could slow down in the next few hours and tomorrow. The speed of Labour gains could slow down, or it could go the other way. I know I keep doing it, doing the health warning, but this story and the narrative could yet switch, and perhaps switch quite dramatically, although from what we have seen tonight, the trend is pretty clear. Chris, when you think about the results that we have seen so far and the Liberal Democrats' progress in lots of places, what surprised you?
Well, actually, you were just talking through the Hertsmere result, and getting +6 there is a great result for the local campaigners there. And I'm really pleased for all of our local campaigners who've really worked their socks off all over the country, up and down the country, and the point that Chris Mason made earlier about the results we get today being a jumping off point for the general election is something that we really must remember, because it's not just winning, it's where we win. And we're winning in the places we need to win. And we'll see later on today, as the other results come through, I'm absolutely confident that we'll be notching, not least in John Redwood's seat in Wokingham, where that went to no overall control last year. And I expect further gains to move it forward.
Tell us then what that might mean then in terms of a general election. And I know you were chief executive of the party for some time, a very experienced campaigner, and you mentioned there those parts of the country. Some people would call it the blue wall. It gives me another excuse to mention Ed Davies' tractor driving through that blue wall. But these seats where the Lib Dems do have hope of taking from the Conservatives, from the results you've seen tonight, put a number on that, what that might mean.
Well, Laura, you press-edged this by saying I'm an experienced campaigner. And I'm so experienced, I wouldn't even come close to answering that question. What I will say is that these are the results we needed to move from. Without the jumping off point that we get through these really excellent results tonight, it would have made our job a heck of a lot harder. So, you know, those activists I just talked about, they can have their rest and they can recharge the batteries, but we'll be out again and we'll be in the places where we've shown to the local electorate that we can win. We've shown that we are the party that can take on largely the Conservatives, but not always, across the country in those seats. And that's where we'll be taking our fight and working hard.
Okay, well, let's see. Let's get back out around the country. And I'm going to take you back to Stoke and our political editor in the West Midlands, Lizzie Glinker, in front of some absolutely jubilant Labour people there. Now, we've talked a lot about Stoke and we can see the celebrations going on. Give us a brief word on what you think happened there. But also, if you can, Lizzie, I'd love to know what else you're picking up from the other really crucial parts of the West Midlands.
Yeah, absolutely. Jubilation. They are very, very happy here. I think what has happened on the ground is that the Labour message that they have been pushing here for the last few weeks of change, albeit that they've been out, they haven't been running this council now since 2015, that message that we are change seems to have got through to voters. I would also say that actually we think turnout has been very low here in Stoke-on-Trent, so that is a kind of sobering element to it. But, Labour took control of this council when they hit 23. That was 25, and they are saying to us now that they think they could potentially get to 26 or 27, which, at the beginning of the night, if you'd said that to the Labour team here, they would have, not necessarily taken you that seriously. They are really thrilled, and I think it kind of, they have poured resources into Stoke-on-Trent. There have been MPs from all over the country, Keir Starmer, a lot of his top team here campaigning, and it seems, it's paid off. They're very pleased about that. Looking at the rest of the region, of course, we don't have all the counts, the majority of our counts are happening later in the day, later on today. But from the ones that we've had, the limited picture that we have now, it does look like Labour have had a good night here in the Midlands. So not necessarily taking control of councils, but, you know, pushing places like Worcester, like Tamworth, no overall control, Labour consolidating their position, doing the same in places like Dudley, in Walsall. These are all things that, in Dudley rather, not in Walsall yet, we don't know, they're counting tomorrow. But these are all things that are positive signs for the Labour Party as they try to rebuild here in the Midlands. You know, after the last general election in 2019, apart from the urban centres in Birmingham, Black Country, Coventry, there's hardly any red left on the map. Hardly any red at all. So these sets of elections, if it carries on tomorrow, as we have seen this evening, that's a very positive sign for the Labour Party here in the Midlands.
And just, Lizzie, briefly, again, just to go back to Stoke, lots of the losses there were the independents losing, which was a big part of the picture, not just Labour gaining, but also a big group of independents there. Just quickly, what's that all about? Who were they and what happened?
Well, it's very interesting that the city independents have been a real force here in Stoke-on-Trent for several decades now. They've run this council. They ran it in coalition with the Conservatives between 2015 and 2019. I think what has happened is that some of the well-known local figures who were at the leadership of that group have now kind of moved away, they've retired, they're no longer around. And it seems that those that are left haven't been able to kind of maintain the position that they've always had, and they have faced a much stiffer challenge on the doorstep in places where I think some of these independents have felt for a long time quite secure, embedded in their communities. Labour, as we said, have poured in the resources, going door to door, leaflet drops, lots of big visits, lots of attention, and it seems that has, you know, that's paid off, because as I said at the beginning of the night, the fear for Labour here was that even if they did well, it would be those independents who would prevent them from getting that victory they were craving. Well, actually, the Conservatives took seats from the independents just as they took seats from the Conservatives, and so you'd have to say that the resources they put in here, you know, it has worked out for them.
Okay, Lizzie, thank you very much indeed. Let's take you then a bit up north and a bit to the right, I suppose to the east I should say, if we're talking about the map. Let's go to my colleague Tim Iredale, who knows all about the east of England. I think, Tim, you're in Scunthorpe for us, in North East Lincolnshire.
I am Laura, Scunthorpe in North Lincolnshire.
Yes. Now, there are two councils, confusingly, one called North Lincolnshire and one called North East Lincolnshire, and it's 528. So forgive me for getting them the wrong way round. What has happened there? And I'd also like you to tell us about what happened in Hull, because we talked earlier in the night about the Lib Dems holding it.
OK, Laura, the situation here is it's nip and tuck at the moment. The last few council seats will be declared very shortly. Labour and the Conservatives pretty much level pegging here, and that mirrors the electoral history of this council, because it's flip-flopped over the years between Labour and the Tories. It's been Conservative since 2011. Now, a lot of people would say this is the kind of area Labour needs to win if it's going to win back the red wall seats you've been talking about all night, because at the heart of this council area is the town of Scunthorpe, which went Conservative for the first time in many years back in 2019. But it looks like the Conservatives at this moment in time are more confident of retaining control of North Lincolnshire, but it will be very close. Now, across the Humber estuary from here, we had a result a little earlier. The Lib Dems held on to Hull, increased their majority in the city. Now, that was a council they won last year from Labour with a slim majority. I think Labour will be disappointed not to have made some headway in Hull, an area they've always thought of really as one of their heartlands.
Tim, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So not always one-way traffic. So you do see trends, you do see things becoming the fashion of the night, but it's absolutely not all one-way traffic ever in any election. And a couple of people who know about those are Katie Bowles, who's the Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator, and also Freddie Hayward, who writes for The New Statesman. Welcome to both of you. Katie, from your reading of what we know so far, how worried will Tory HQ be?
I mean, I think it's looking bad, ultimately. We've had lots of expectation management in advance. I think what's worrying for the Conservatives and figures at CCHQ is you are hearing figures such as John Curtice, of course, saying it's not impossible that Tories do lose close to 1,000 seats. Now, when the Tory party chairman, Greg Hands, was saying that on the airwaves, it was largely because they did not think they would lose 1,000 seats. And they're trying to set it to a point that if you got less than that, you could then spin it as, oh, we didn't do as badly as you expect. So I think it'll be worrying that that is a figure being talked about still by pollsters. Obviously, it's still very early on in terms of the results. There's lots more to come. But I think the other aspect that's going to worry Tory MPs and, of course, Tory councillors is the fact that they're being squeezed from different sides here. So you have Labour making gains, but also you look at Hertzmere, so the Deputy Prime Minister's, Oliver Dowden, and the fact that the Tories have lost control of their council and that's a blue wall Lib Dem push. Look what's happening in Windsor. It's adding to the sense of where are the Tories particularly safe, and I think that's going to cause some anxiety, the fact that it's coming from different areas at the moment.
And just as we're talking, another Conservative council lost, this time East Lindsey, the biggest town there, Skegness, and that's a Conservative loss there. Now, that's an area with very strong Conservative representation. It's been Tory since 2015. So it'll be interesting to see how that result breaks down. Let's take a quick look. 26 seats for the Conservatives, 21 independents. Isn't that interesting? And the change of seats, Tories losing 3 and the independents gaining 3. But another Conservative council actually being lost to them. Freddie, let's think about Labour for a second. How would you predict the conversation in the party will go in the next few days if these trends continue? So, good step forward, but maybe not giant decisive leaps.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing so far is basically that the polls have been broadly correct. I mean, as Katie said, we've got a long way to go, but I think Labour will be broadly happy with some of the gains they've made. They had to make gains in the Red Wall in places like Stoke. But what they'll be looking for is making gains elsewhere because they need to go beyond what they did in 2017. They can't just regain the Red Wall. If they really want to get a majority at the next general election, they have to make gains elsewhere. That's why places like Worcester are really important. There's some other interesting trends as well. Is Labour doing quite well in terms of Brexit voters in certain Leave areas. They're also doing quite well with non-graduates. So these are some of the key constituents that propelled Boris Johnson into number 10 in 2019. And I think Labour will be happy that they're making some progress there.
Freddie and Katie, political editor of The Spectator, and Freddie of The New Statesman, political magazine. Thank you both very much for joining us at this late hour. Let's now talk to one of the probable winners of the night, Vince Maple. Good evening. Good morning, Vince. You're the Labour group leader in Medway. Can you confirm that you are going to become leader of the council from the results we've heard so far?
Well, good morning, Laura, from Medway. At this stage, we haven't had all the results in yet. But from what we've seen, we've won wards we were targeting, working hard in, and we believe that we're going to have a pretty seismic result here in Medway. We've never had, in the history of Medway Council, a Labour majority-controlled council. We think we're on target for that as we stand here. But of course, we've got to wait for every vote to be counted.
Your Conservative opponent, though, told us he was pretty sure they're not going to be the biggest group, you are. And he told us he thought it was because of boundary changes and housing targets. Now, is that why you think you're probably going to win?
Green Party 174.
Well, look, I think we've won because we've had an amazing campaign, actually. We've worked hard day in, day out as opposition councillors, brilliant candidates. We've had great support from the party, both regionally, locally and nationally. Keir Starmer's been down twice. We've had a number of front bench people come and support us on the doorsteps. And actually the reaction from people on the doorsteps was they were pleased to see those Westminster individuals come down and support the team here in Medway. They know that when they have Labour councillors, we deliver for them. And tonight it looks as if, and again, we don't have all the results yet, but it looks as if Medway residents are going to choose change by choosing Labour.
What were you hearing on the doorsteps, though, Councillor Maple? Was it enthusiasm for your campaign or also frustration with what's happened in the last 12 months?
I think a bit of both. So I was speaking to people, for a 90-year-old in Strood who has voted Conservative for 70 years. He lent us his vote this week. It's pretty humbling, actually, to hear that. We've got people voting for the very first time, choosing to vote Labour. And that's a combination of poor services delivered by here, the Conservative Council. We know that if we do have the opportunity to serve, we're inheriting a financial mess. But also, that's not the only financial mess. It's the one that we saw last year, particularly from Liz Truss. Again, I've been speaking to homeowners in Medway who are paying hundreds of pounds a month more on their mortgage. So it's a combination of all of those things, as is often the case in local elections. Of course, we put forward our pledges. They're deliverable and achievable. But some people will be looking, of course, at the national programme. And again, when Keir Starmer was here, when we took him out in Gillingham, the reaction, people were pulling up to chat to him. People can see positive change. The like we haven't seen here in Medway since we won those 3 seats back in 1997 and, of course, held them throughout those 13 years.
Councillor Maple, thank you very much indeed. And we will keep you posted if we get official confirmation of what we think has happened in Medway. Chris, one of those maybe, names of the night, Medway, Plymouth, Stoke, certainly, still with tons more to come, but certainly this first episode of these election results, Labour feeling very cheerful.
Yeah, so we've had about a fifth now, I think, of the results. So there's still one heck of a long way to go. The night might be old, but the day is young. But yeah, there are plenty of places, crucial places, geographically important places that Labour are able to point to where they are winning, where they absolutely have to be winning if they're going to win those seats come a general election and try and assemble a majority given where they start out from. Loads more results still to come. What's quite striking is that in the build-up to tonight, today, whatever we're going to call it, there was a sense from some in the Labour Party that they may only be able to point to what they would see as significant progress once we got well into Friday rather than at 5:30 in the morning. In other words, they had a sense, and who knows whether this turns out to be true or not, but they had a sense as things started out that things might get progressively better for them as Friday went on and that things for the Conservatives might look more bleak. And yet here we are at sort of 5:30 in the morning and the clear thing is that the Conservatives have had a pretty miserable night so far. Labour doing relatively well, and the Liberal Democrats wearing very big smiles.
And just in terms of councils changing hands, I think we're now the tally. The Conservatives, I think, have lost control of 5. Labour have gained control of 2.
Yeah, and we haven't yet seen any direct switches from control from one party to control to another. So they've been going in and out of either no overall control to a political party or from that to no overall control.
And if the Medway result comes through as it might do, that would be, I think, the first one of those of the night. Let's go to our panel as we are now unbelievably starting to wing our way to the end of our time together. Hugh Merriman, I want to come back to something that you said before, that you would reflect on the results. Do you anticipate that you will change anything as a result of the evidence that's come from real votes, real voters, not national opinion polls? Do you think Rishi Sunak will look at these results and think, you know what, maybe I do need to tweak some of my plans?
Well, I believe we already have, but I also recognise that this is the...
In the middle of the night?
That this is the... No, I mean, from October, when we had a change of leader. But I also recognise that we changed our leader and therefore the Prime Minister 3 times in a year. And this is the first opportunity the electorate have had to give their verdict on that. And it has not gone well so far. But I also believe that the policies that he has put in place are the policies that the voters I speak to on the doorsteps want from their government. So I think the test now is for us to be competent, for us to be united, and for us to start delivering on those pledges. And then the electorate will listen to us. They will take us seriously again. And I believe they'll give us a chance, because I don't believe they're sold on Keir Starmer. There are a lot of sort of don't-knows out there right now that have perhaps sort of fallen out of love with us, but they certainly haven't fallen in love with Labour in the way that we saw under Tony Blair in 1997. I think these results, because they're going Lib Dem in some parts, Independent some parts, Labour some parts, it doesn't tell me that everyone is shifting towards the Labour Party. It tells me that people are frustrated with our performance And I believe that we've now got it within us to turn it around.
Do you honestly feel more or less confident about your prospects at the general election as a result of what we've seen tonight?
Well, obviously, this is the wake-up call, but I always expected this because this was the first opportunity the electorate have had to give their verdict on our performance. And we've been in power 13 years. We had a really challenging year last year, and we changed our leader 3 times. Of course, the public are going to give their verdict on that.
Except that, Hugh, Rishi Sunak has had, 6 or 7 months. Some of the tone of what you're saying is kind of as if he took over last week. People have had a fair amount of time now to have a good look at him. He hasn't just moved into number 10. And you're sort of saying, well, I think that voters will come back and see what we're doing is the right thing, rather than you saying, oh, maybe we should listen to them.
Look, we do listen to the voters, but my point is that this is the first opportunity the electorate have had to give their verdict on our performance. We've been in power for 13 years. Last year was a terrible year. I do believe, though, and you look at the opinion poll, they've really cut through in terms of his performance. He outperforms us all. And I think, he's our asset. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's all about delivery now. And to a certain extent, I know I'm talking here, but public have had enough talk. They actually want delivery and they want us to turn it around. And I believe under him, we are doing so and we will do so.
Peter.
Keir Starmer launched our campaign in Medway. We've won Medway. Keir Starmer visited Stoke twice. We've won Stoke. Keir Starmer's been down in Dover. Let's see how Dover goes tomorrow. We're going to places that the Labour Party has not succeeded in for 2 decades. In Medway, that has been a Tory council for 20 years. It's got 3 Tory MPs. Stoke has got 3 Tory MPs. These are areas we're making strides in. I noticed the chart where the national share has gone up for Labour 1 percentage point in the last 45 minutes. I think you two need to stop using this language of a step but not a leap. And start moving towards a leap, because we have taken we have really moved forward tonight, and Keir Starmer's fingerprints are all over the gains that we have made. I think that there is something happening out there that is not being reflected in the narrative that's emerging, because Labour is doing incredibly well. 1/5 of all of the seats that are up for election in this election have been called tonight, and Labour is 100 seats up. The Tories are what? Already almost 200 down. So I think this is a really good, solid performance for the Labour Party tonight. It's encouraging. It shows that we're targeting right. We're getting the messaging right centrally and locally. We're getting our organisational act is getting together. The Labour Party is back in business. We're moving forward, and hopefully we're moving towards government.
Chris, do you recognise that? Do you think Peter's giving an accurate reflection of what you've heard?
Well, I think we move in different circles, because I think where I've been campaigning is where we're winning and Labour generally isn't. So I know he's an honourable man, and I'm sure he means what he says. I'm also very impressed with Hugh's chutzpah, I think, really. He talks about being on a course and it's all kind of back in track. But what are we on a course for? When the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England tells the people of the United Kingdom that they have to accept that they're poorer, and even if you factor in public sector pay increases, they are poorer, and they will still be poorer in a year's time when we have the election. The GP queues will be longer than they are now, and the rivers will have more sewage in them then than they have now. So what are we on course for? And I think that is what people are telling us, whether they're telling Labour campaigners or Liberal Democrat campaigners or other campaigners. That's what they, in their hearts, they see. They know that they're poorer. They know that the health service is absolutely against a wall. And they know that mismanagement of things like the environment spell real problems for them and their children. And that's what we're seeing.
OK, all 3 of you, thank you very much indeed for now. Let's go quickly to another couple of keen observers of the political scene. Alita Adu, who's a political correspondent from The Guardian, and Henry Zeffman, who is from The Times. Thanks both for being with us. If you're writing your headlines for tomorrow, or maybe you know what they already are, or headlines for today, I should say, what would they be, Alita?
Well, I must say, Laura, I was just really struck hearing Hugh describing the situation that the Tories have found themselves in this morning. Obviously, it's very early for us to be drawing, some very big conclusions, as our headline writers are desperate to at the moment. But I mean, it's as if the Tories haven't been in power for 13 years, and as was rightly pointed out, Rishi Sunak has had at least a 6-month stretch to really show that he is the competent and united leader that the Tories needed. Unfortunately, throughout the night we've heard from a lot of ousted council leaders, like the one from Worcester, who was highlighting the fact that the drama of the Tory party that's going on in Westminster, the chaos of Boris Johnson, more chaos from Liz Truss, and yet another Tory leader is something that kept cropping up on the doorsteps. And ultimately, if we look at areas like Plymouth, where Labour made huge gains also, I mean, we can't really, assume that that gain has been made simply because of the tree felling controversy. I mean, when I talk to activists, people are highlighting the fact that people have really struggled with a Plymouth cost of living crisis that is also being felt drastically across the country. Not to mention issues of voter ID, where people feel as though the government has suppressed their democracy, suppressed their right to vote, and that will automatically hit a number of ethnic minorities, people of different religions and races and so forth, because they simply don't have enough money to renew their ID. And this is all in the backdrop of a Conservative government, unfortunately. So I think Johnny Mercer earlier in the night was right to point out the fact that, yes, it's a fight, and the fight is on until the next election, and he seemed very keen to keep, a conversation ongoing with his voters. I hope that's something he's been doing, way before polling day. But ultimately, I think the test is now on Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. Is he giving voters enough of a chance to prove that, we're not just voting Labour or the Lib Dems or the Green Party as some sort of tactical vote, but rather because we believe in something else?
Let's put that to Henry then. I mean, one of the Tory leaders who lost tonight told us he felt it was a protest vote. Do you think that's an accurate summation?
It's definitely a protest vote. It's just a question of what they're protesting against. I mean, are they protesting against the last year of Conservative tumult, as Hugh Merriman was arguing, or are they protesting against the last 13 years of Conservative government and saying they want a Labour government afterwards? I think there's plenty of grounds for optimism for Labour politicians from these results so far that the answer is the latter, and that this is a precursor to Labour getting into government in a year or 18-month or so's time. I think, we were expecting the better results for the Labour Party to come round about midday today, a bit later today, from the councils which start to count a bit later. But actually what seems to have happened is that the Labour Party has done better than they expected to overnight. And look, I think fundamentally, you can get quite complicated about these things. Fundamentally, a terrible night for the Conservatives, which this is shaping up to be, is a good night for the Labour Party, because in the two-party system that we have at Westminster, or 2.5 parties, or however you want to put it, if the Conservatives are losing support to the Lib Dems in the south and sort of commuter belt territory, and to Labour, not just in the southwest in Plymouth, but also in Stoke and the Midlands and other parts of the country, well, that is only going to benefit the only other party that can form a government or can lead a government in Westminster, which is, of course, the Labour Party.
Henry Zeffman and Alisa Adu, thank you very much indeed for waiting patiently and for speaking to us as we come to nearly 10 to 6 in the morning. Time to have a last check-in with Reeta about something that we've been talking about on and off through the programme, how all the numbers from the net today and tomorrow will be fed into a huge, big projection of something really important, the projected national share. Take us through what you're seeing.
This is the vote share over time, a projection based on the results that we have in now of how the parties are doing overall. It is, I hasten to say, a projection, but this is, if the direction of travel continues as it has done, this is where we are estimating the parties land. So Labour compared to last year, really pretty much the same, actually, just a fraction of a percentage point up. The Conservatives down sharply, -5%, the Lib Dems up 1% and others up 4%. Now, you might look at this and think, well, how is it then that the Labour Party has been picking up seats tonight? And that's because we have to compare their performance there to the performance 4 years ago, which is the last time that these seats were fought over. So it's that, and also the fact that the Conservatives have dipped, and where the Conservatives dip, the Labour Party is able to pick up more seats. But there is food for thought here for the Labour Party too. Not advancing much on last year is perhaps not an ideal scenario for them. And if you go back to 2012, you'll see here when Labour was led by Ed Miliband, actually they picked up they were higher up in the projected national share than they are now. Let's take one final look at the councils to watch. We started off with a very different screen, didn't we? But look at all the changes that have happened. The Conservatives have lost Brentwood, North West Leicestershire, East Lindsey in Lincolnshire and Hertsmere as well. That is the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden's constituency there. Labour have hung on to all of these councils here. The one or two that you see in grey or white have still not declared. The Lib Dems also have hung on to all of those councils. North Devon, they're still counting, and 2 gains among those that are hung for Labour, Plymouth and Stoke-on-Trent. So more red, quite a bit more red on this screen than blue, and quite a bit of yellow as well. Will that change in the hours to come? We shall see.
Thank you very much, Rita, because a reminder, of course, the losses for the Tories could slow down or speed up, and the gains for the Labour Party could slow down or speed up. And of course, the Lib Dems, also their tally could go up and down at a rate of knots. We'll see what the next few hours brings. Let's check in for the final time before we go to Breakfast News with Sir John Curtice, who's been feverishly working on all these incredible numbers. John, what are your closing thoughts towards the end of episode 1 of quite the box set?
Well, I think if Conservatives were hoping that the message from the ballot boxes was that the party wasn't perhaps in quite so much electoral trouble, not quite so much in the slough of electoral despond as the opinion polls have been suggesting, then I think so far at least those hopes don't look as though they're going to be realised. We are look at the moment looking at the Conservatives recording a lower share of the vote in our key councils than they did 4 years ago, and 4 years ago it was already pretty bad. What is a little less clear is how much we should say that the plaudits go to Labour and how much the plaudits should go to the Liberal Democrats and to the Greens. Now, certainly when it comes to seat gains, it's definitely Labour who have made the biggest advance. But I think Labour will just be a little bit niggled about the fact that, again, when we add up the votes, the party doesn't seem to have made, at least in these local government elections, much of an advance on last year. I think it would have liked to have been at least up a point or two. In contrast, the Liberal Democrats are up a point or so, and in the end, if the Conservatives do, as they still seem to be at risk of being, 1,000 seats down on where they were at 7 o'clock yesterday morning, then it may well be the losses that the Conservatives suffered to the Liberal Democrats that will be a crucial part of that equation. And we may find Liberal Democrats have it's not great progress, it's slow progress, but the Liberal Democrats may have recorded their best performance since 2010. The Greens pretty much managed to hang on to the support that they had in 2019, which was a record level, have done particularly well in the wards where they best had a chance. So, I mean, there are 2 ways of then looking at this so far as the opposition parties are concerned. One is to say, well, English local government is not like Westminster, it's more variegated, and therefore don't be surprised that voters have sometimes used the Liberal Democrats and the Greens to express their dissatisfaction and not just Labour. The alternative way of looking at it is perhaps there is a message here that voters are not yet necessarily fully enthused about the Labour alternative, even if they are clearly disenchanted about the current Conservative government.
OK, Sir John, well, we're always very infused by your insight and wisdom, and thank you very much indeed for that. We are running short of time, but a final word to each of the panel. Sir John, suggesting to you, Chris, that this could be your best performance in a long time at local council elections.
Well, I think it will be. And when I left my house in Windsor, it was represented by 3 Conservatives. And by the time I get home, it'll be represented by 3 brilliant Liberal Democrats. And that's happening all over the country, north, south, east and west. And that's great.
Sir John suggested that you might be a bit niggled, Peter Cow.
I'm not niggled, actually. I'm quite ecstatic about the progress that we've made tonight. It's not the right thing to do to compare last year's local elections to this year's local elections. This year's local elections is just in England, and it's not including London. It's not including most of Manchester. You know, these are parts of the country that actually are quite challenging for the Labour Party. It shows that we're reconnecting to parts of the country, to England that we've lost to.
But let's not have a row about the statistics. But the point he's making that I'm asking you for your comment on is whether or not there is a bit where you just would like to be just a bit further forward to look more decisive.
I think we are making really solid progress today. I mean, we're really happy. We shouldn't equivocate about this. I mean, the Tories have lost go on course to losing almost a third of all of their seats that were available to win tonight, the ones that they already held tonight. We're going to be gaining really substantially tonight, and then let's see what happens throughout the day, because there's some really important ones for us throughout the day. We're happy tonight.
We'll watch that carefully. And Hugh, are you in the slough of despond, which Sir John suggested you might be, or maybe you ought to be?
A really difficult night. It could get more difficult for us, but the reality is this is the voters sending a message to us. We need to listen. Of course, next time when they vote for a general election, it will be which of these two people do you want to run the country? That hasn't been the case for the elections we're going through. So I think we've got it all to turn it around, but we need to be humble, we need to listen, and we need to deliver.
OK, Hugh, Peter and Chris, thank you very much for being with us here. Chris, final word to you.
So the party leadership teams are waking up before their big noises come out and talk to the Today programme and Breakfast TV and all the rest of it. Conservatives acknowledging it's been disappointing. Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, describing their results as groundbreaking. And Labour saying that they reckon that they would confident that with the equivalent vote share lead, they would be on track to win the general election.
Wow.
So that's the take from those three big parties at, 4 minutes to 6, and still shed loads of results to come.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Well, quite the prediction there from Labour HQ to take us out, because in a few minutes we will hand you to the team at BBC Breakfast. They will be with you for the next few hours. Then later, a Politics Live special will have all of the latest results with my colleague Jo Coburn. She'll be on BBC Two and BBC News from 12. But results as they come in are, of course, on the BBC website, where the results and the trends are constantly streaming in. A huge thank you in the meantime to all my guests here around the country, and of course to our teams who've burned the midnight oil staying up as the story has been developing across England, unfolding in front of our very eyes. It's been a very difficult night for the Conservatives. They predicted they might lose 1,000 seats, and it looks like that prediction might have been right, while Labour has taken councils like Plymouth and Stoke, although their share of the vote so far at this stage is barely up on last year's local elections. But remember, a huge amount more to come. The picture is as yet incomplete. It's the first big public verdict on Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, and an important marker for Keir Starmer, he hopes, on the road to number 10. But lastly, most of all, thank you for your company. It's been great to have you with us for the last few hours, but for now, from me and from BBC Election 2023, goodbye, and I'll see you on Sunday.